You think you know things. You don't. Neither do scientists. Here are 101 facts so stubborn, so weird, so aggressively wrong that the smartest people on Earth are still arguing about them. Starting now. 1. You've been told your entire life that you're only using 10% of your brain, and unlocking the rest will turn you into some kind of walking supercomputer. Every motivational speaker, every low-budget sci-fi film, every self-help book since the 1970s has repeated this with complete confidence, and every single one of them was wrong. Brain imaging technology, fMRI scans, PET scans, consistently shows activity distributed across nearly all brain regions, even when you're doing something as cognitively demanding as watching television or staring at a wall. Here's the thing about expensive biological tissue. Evolution doesn't maintain it if it's idle. Your brain consumes 20% of your body's total energy, despite being only 2% of your body weight. Nature does not run a charity for unused real estate. Neurological damage to virtually any brain region produces measurable deficits. If 90% were truly vacant, damaging those areas would produce no symptoms whatsoever. The myth was misattributed to Einstein, who never said it, and likely originated from a misreading of early neuroscience noting that only 10% of brain cells are neurons. The rest are glial cells, which are also critical. You are already running at full capacity. The problem isn't unused brain. The problem is that the brain you're fully using believed this for 30 years. 2. You've probably repeated this one at a campfire or during a thunderstorm, standing confidently under the assumption that the universe keeps records and respects previous decisions. Lightning struck there once, so you're safe. The laws of physics have already used that spot. Move on. The Empire State Building is struck by lightning an average of 23 times per year and has been hit multiple times in a single storm on numerous documented occasions. Lightning doesn't consult a ledger. It follows the path of least electrical resistance to the ground, and tall, conductive, isolated objects offer that path for the exact same physical reasons every single time the conditions are right. A United States park ranger named Roy Sullivan was struck by lightning 7 separate times across 35 years. The same human being, repeatedly, as if the sky had a grudge and excellent aim. The phrase itself is a metaphorical idiom about improbability, never intended to be interpreted as physics. It was never a rule. It was a figure of speech that somehow graduated into a safety strategy. Telling yourself lightning won't hit the same place twice is like standing on a busy highway median and deciding you're safe because a car already passed. The highway doesn't keep records. Neither does the storm. 3. You learned this in kindergarten. You've repeated it your entire adult life, and the number you've been using is wrong by a factor of at least 2. Sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. 5. Clean, simple, completely insufficient. Humans have somewhere between 9 and 21 distinct senses, depending on how researchers define and count them, and the scientific community has not agreed on a final number, which should tell you something. Proprioception, your sense of where your body is in space without looking, is entirely distinct from touch. Close your eyes right now and touch your nose. That navigation happened without one of your 5 listed senses being involved. Vestibular sense handles balance. Thermoception detects temperature. Nociception processes pain. Interoception reads your internal body state, hunger, thirst, heart rate, the awareness that something is wrong before you can name what. These are all neurologically distinct sensory systems with their own dedicated hardware. The 5 senses framework comes from Aristotle, around 350 BCE. It was a philosophical categorization made without microscopes, without neuroscience, without any of the tools that would later reveal what the nervous system actually does. Some researchers argue for additional senses, including magnetoception and time perception. You've been navigating a 21-channel sensory experience your whole life while confidently telling everyone you only get 5. You didn't even know you had cable? 4. This one has been in geography textbooks, repeated at trivia nights, cited in school presentations, and delivered with the particular confidence reserved for facts that sound impressive and require no verification. The Great Wall of China, visible from space with the naked eye, the single man-made structure you can see from orbit. It is not visible from space. Multiple astronauts have specifically looked for it and failed. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei, the first Chinese person in space, attempted to locate the wall in 2003 and publicly announced he could not see it, which caused considerable media discussion in China at the time. The wall averages roughly 15 to 30 feet wide. At orbital altitude, approximately 250 miles up, the human eye cannot resolve an object that narrow regardless of its length, for the same reason you cannot see a human hair from 100 feet away. Length does not compensate for width at that scale. NASA has noted the wall has been photographed from low Earth orbit using cameras with zoom lenses under ideal lighting conditions, but unaided human vision cannot detect it. The myth is believed to date to a 1932 publication, decades before anyone had actually been to space to verify the claim. An entire civilization repeated a fact for 90 years before anyone could check it, and the moment someone could check it, it immediately fell apart. 5. Somewhere in the world right now, a goldfish is being described as an amnesiac by someone who read this statistic once and filed it under confirmed. The 3-second memory. The guilt-free neglect. The convenient biological excuse for a dirty tank. Goldfish have a memory span measurable in months, can be trained to perform tasks, and demonstrate clear learned behavioral responses. None of which is possible with a 3-second memory by any definition of how memory works. Researchers at Plymouth University trained goldfish to press a lever for food at a specific time of day. The fish learned the schedule and began pressing the lever at the correct time after repeated sessions. In controlled laboratory settings, goldfish retain conditioning from light signals and sound cues for up to 5 months. In the wild, goldfish navigate territory, learn feeding patterns, and avoid previously encountered predators, all behaviors requiring persistent memory. No scientific study has ever identified a 3-second memory limit in goldfish. The origin of the specific 3-second figure appears to be entirely invented, possibly as a joke, and was then repeated until it calcified into accepted fact. The goldfish didn't forget anything. You invented its stupidity so you wouldn't feel guilty about the tank. The fish remembers. You're the one who forgot to clean it. 6. Napoleon Bonaparte. Compact, combative, vengeful because of his height, the founding patron saint of the psychological complex named after him, the definitive historical example of a short man overcompensating with an empire. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. That is average to slightly above average height for a French man of his era, and the entire mythology of his stature is a unit conversion error combined with remarkably effective wartime propaganda. Napoleon's recorded height of 5 feet 2 inches was measured in French inches, pouces, which are longer than English inches. Converting correctly to modern imperial measurement yields approximately 5 feet 7. British wartime propaganda, particularly the caricature work of cartoonist James Gilray, deliberately depicted Napoleon as tiny and infantile to mock and undermine him. Those images spread widely and stuck with the permanence of things that confirm what people already want to believe. His nickname among his troops was Le Petit Caporal, the Little Corporal, a term of affection referring to his approachability and willingness to mix with enlisted men, not a description of his physical dimensions. Contemporary accounts describe him as being of average build. His imperial guard was required to be tall, which may have created a contrast effect in historical imagery. An entire psychological complex is named after a man who wasn't short, built on a unit conversion error and enemy cartoons. The real Napoleon complex belongs to everyone who repeated this without checking. 7. Someone told you this. You told someone else. Now, an entire generation sleeps with a faint background anxiety about their own open mouth, and the original source of this fact was a deliberate fabrication designed to prove how easily people accept false information, which immediately became accepted as true information, making it the most perfectly self-defeating piece of misinformation ever created. Columnist Lisa Holst published a list of facts people believe in 1993, including the spider swallowing claim, specifically to demonstrate how misinformation spreads unchecked. The list was then shared without context, and the items became genuinely believed. Spiders are extraordinarily sensitive to vibrations. A sleeping human produces a constant sensory environment of heartbeat, breathing, snoring, and body heat that registers as a massive threat to any nearby spider. The interior of a human open mouth offers nothing a spider wants. No prey, no shelter, no web anchor point, and active airflow in both directions. Arachnologists have noted there is no documented evidence, no observational study, and no credible biological mechanism that would make this scenario occur with any regularity in any species of spider. You spent years sleeping with mild unease because of a column written about how easily people believe things they read. You were the point of the article. You were always the point. The column worked perfectly. 8. You've seen the movies. Man with spear. Beast with teeth. Dramatic foot chase through primordial jungle. Some people genuinely believe that humans and non-avian dinosaurs occupied the same geological era. Some of those people are very confident about it. Non-avian dinosaurs went extinct approximately 66 million years ago. Anatomically modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. The gap between those two numbers is 65,700,000 years. A span so large it makes all of recorded human history look like a measurement error. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, triggered by the Chicxulub asteroid impact, occurred 66 million years ago. The earliest members of the genus Homo appear in the fossil record around 2 to 3 million years ago. Anatomically modern Homo sapiens appear at approximately 300,000 years ago. To put the scale in terms that might actually land, if Earth's entire history were compressed into a single calendar year, non-avian dinosaurs went extinct on December 26th, and humans appeared at 11:48 p.m. on December 31st. You didn't just miss the dinosaurs. You missed them by a margin so enormous it makes every human civilization, every war, every empire, every recorded word in every language look like the last 12 minutes of a year. You were late, cosmically, embarrassingly late. 9. The image is one of the most iconic in sports. The matador, the scarlet cape, the charging bull driven into a fury by the color red. It is one of the most reproduced images in human visual culture, and it is based on a physiological impossibility, because bulls cannot see red as a distinct color. Cattle are dichromats. Their eyes contain 2 types of color receptors, rather than the 3 humans possess, which means they cannot distinguish red from green. Both appear as a similar muted yellow-brown tone. The bull in a corrida is not responding to the color of the muleta. It is responding to the movement of the muleta, the provocation of the matador, and the sustained agitation of the entire spectacle surrounding it. Studies in which bulls were presented with stationary capes in red, blue, and white showed no preferential charging toward the red one. The bulls charged based on movement, not color. The red color of the traditional muleta is believed to serve a practical purpose entirely unrelated to the bull, masking bloodstains during the fight. It is a costuming decision made for the audience, not a psychological trigger aimed at the animal. The bull doesn't care about the color. The bull cares about the thing moving aggressively in its face. The red cape was always for you. 10. There is an extremely high probability that you were shown this diagram in a classroom. A drawing of a tongue divided into neat labeled zones, sweet at the tip, bitter at the back, salty and sour arranged on the sides in tidy little regions. Teachers drew it on boards. It went into textbooks. Students memorized it for tests. It was completely, foundationally wrong, and it has been known to be wrong for decades. Taste receptors for all 5 basic tastes are distributed across the entire tongue surface with no meaningful regional specialization. The myth originates from a 1901 German paper by D.P. Honig that was widely misinterpreted. Honig's original data showed only marginal sensitivity differences across tongue regions, not exclusive zones where one taste was present and others were absent. Subsequent neuroscience research confirmed that individual taste buds contain receptor cells for multiple taste qualities simultaneously. The science was always more nuanced than the diagram suggested. Taste buds also exist on the soft palate, the epiglottis, and the upper esophagus. The tongue map was already wrong about where tasting even happens. This diagram survived 2 world wars, the space race, and the dawn of the internet, continuing to appear in educational materials for roughly 70 years after the underlying claim was discredited. Your taste buds were correct the entire time. The diagram needed the map, not your tongue. 11. Every parent said it. Every health teacher confirmed it. Every after-school public service announcement delivered it with appropriate gravity. Alcohol destroys your brain cells permanently, one irreplaceable neuron at a time, a microscopic massacre with every drink. The actual biology is different in a way that matters. Moderate alcohol consumption does not kill neurons outright. It disrupts communication between them by damaging dendrites, the branch-like projections that neurons use to talk to each other. The cell body survives. The communication degrades. These are meaningfully different biological events with meaningfully different implications for everything from recovery to policy. The claim that alcohol kills brain cells likely originates from temperance movement rhetoric of the early 20th century, a persuasive moral argument dressed in scientific language that didn't quite match the mechanism. Chronic, severe alcoholism is associated with Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which does cause serious neurological damage. But this is largely driven by severe thiamine deficiency caused by alcoholism's destruction of nutritional health, not direct neuron death from ethanol itself. The adult brain also continues generating new neurons in regions including the hippocampus, and heavy alcohol use suppresses that process. A genuine concern that is categorically different from killing existing cells. Alcohol doesn't kill your brain cells. It makes them stop communicating properly, which in a social context is also called everyone at the party after midnight. The cells are still there. They're just not talking. 12. Someone is missing. You call the police. The officer on television says you have to wait 24 hours. You've seen this in every crime drama, every thriller, every procedural ever filmed. It is the foundational, bureaucratic obstacle of the missing person genre. It is also a complete fiction, and its persistence in popular culture actively discourages real people from reporting real emergencies during the window. When reporting would be most effective, there is no law, no regulation, and no policy in any United States state requiring a 24-hour waiting period before filing a missing persons report. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the FBI, and the National Crime Information Center all explicitly state there is no mandatory waiting period. Law enforcement can and should act immediately, particularly for vulnerable populations, including children, elderly individuals, and people with medical conditions. The first hours after a person goes missing are statistically the most critical. The majority of abduction-related child fatalities occur within the first 3 hours of disappearance. The myth is so pervasive that police departments across the country have issued public statements specifically to debunk it. The likely origin is a misunderstanding of older localized police discretion, where some departments historically chose not to prioritize adult reports immediately. A policy preference, not a legal requirement. Television invented a rule that makes real emergencies worse, repeated it until people stopped reporting at the right time, and called it drama. 13. This was the line, the definitive separator between humans and everything else on the evolutionary tree. We build tools, they don't. Therefore, we're special. Therefore, we're in charge. Therefore, the entire arrangement of the natural world makes sense around us. Tool use has been documented in dozens of non-human species. New Caledonian crows manufacture hooked tools from leaves to extract insects from bark. They select specific materials, shape them deliberately, and transport them between foraging sites. That is tool manufacturing, not tool use, and it required scientists to redefine what the word tool meant when they encountered it. Bottlenose dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, place marine sponges over their beaks while foraging on the seafloor to protect themselves from sharp rocks and stinging animals. The behavior is culturally transmitted from mothers to offspring across generations. Capuchin monkeys use stone hammers and anvils to crack open nuts, and archaeological evidence suggests this tradition has persisted in some populations for over 3,000 years, predating many human technological developments in the same region. When Jane Goodall first reported chimpanzee tool use in the 1960s, her mentor Louis Leakey responded, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans." The field chose option 1. The crow is still out there with a hook it made itself. It does not care about your category system. 14. Every child draws it. Yellow circle, blue sky, green grass. The sun is yellow. It is in every crayon set ever manufactured, on every piece of childhood artwork that has ever been displayed on a refrigerator, burned into the visual vocabulary of human culture as the most basic observable fact. From space, the sun is white. Its light contains the full visible spectrum in roughly equal proportions, and when those wavelengths combine, the result is brilliant, unambiguous white. Photographs and direct observation from orbit confirm this. The sun's surface temperature is approximately 5,500 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, a radiating object emits light that peaks in the green portion of the spectrum. But because it emits strongly across all visible wavelengths simultaneously, the combined output is white. The yellow-orange appearance from Earth's surface is caused by the atmosphere scattering shorter wavelengths, blue light, in all directions. This is also why the sky is blue, and why the sun appears progressively more orange near the horizon, where sunlight travels through more atmosphere before reaching your eye. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory images, when not artificially colorized for scientific communication purposes, show a white star. Astronauts confirm it directly. You have been coloring the most important object in the solar system the wrong color your entire life, and the yellow crayon has been getting unearned credit for decades. 15. This one feels airtight. Summer is hot because Earth is closer to the sun. Winter is cold because Earth is farther away. The logic is geometrically reasonable, thermally intuitive, and completely backwards. Earth is actually closer to the sun in January, during the northern hemisphere's winter, than it is in July. The closest point in Earth's orbit, called perihelion, occurs around January 3rd each year. On that date, temperatures in the northern half of the planet are at their seasonal minimum. The distance effect is real, but modest. The difference between Earth's closest and farthest orbital points changes received solar energy by only about 7%, nowhere near enough to drive the temperature swings humans experience between seasons. Seasons are caused entirely by Earth's 23.5-degree axial tilt. When the northern hemisphere tilts toward the sun, it receives solar radiation at a higher angle, concentrated over a smaller surface area, for a longer portion of the day. That combination is summer. The southern hemisphere experiences the opposite at the same time. When it is summer in Australia, it is winter in Canada. And both hemispheres are at exactly the same distance from the sun simultaneously, because there is only one sun and one Earth, and they share the orbit. The planet told you the answer the entire time. You just never looked south. 16. You're sick. You want antibiotics. Sometimes you get them. Sometimes a physician who knows better prescribes them anyway, because the appointment is easier that way. And this dynamic, repeated across millions of consultations globally, is generating one of the most serious public health threats of the modern era. Influenza is caused by a virus. Antibiotics work exclusively on bacteria by targeting cellular mechanisms that bacteria possess, and viruses do not. Cell wall synthesis, bacterial protein production, bacterial DNA replication. Viruses use your own cell's machinery to replicate. There is no bacterial target for the antibiotic to attack. Prescribing antibiotics for a viral illness does precisely nothing for the patient's viral infection, and simultaneously contributes to a crisis that has nothing to do with their flu. The World Health Organization identifies antibiotic resistance as one of the greatest threats to global health, A 2016 review estimated antibiotic-resistant infections cause approximately 700,000 deaths per year globally, with projections reaching 10 million annual deaths by 2050 if current trends continue. Patient demand is a documented driver of inappropriate prescribing. Studies show physicians are statistically more likely to prescribe antibiotics when they perceive the patient expects them, regardless of clinical indication. You asked for the wrong tool. Sometimes you got it. Now the right tool works less well for the problems it was built to solve. 17. Your mother said it. Your coach confirmed it. Some adults standing near cold weather delivered it as established physiology. Put on a hat. 80% of your body heat escapes through your head. The hat became mandatory. The statistic became gospel, and the actual number is roughly 10%, which is exactly what you would predict for a body part that represents approximately 10% of total body surface area. The head loses heat proportionally to its exposed surface area. There is nothing thermally special about the scalp. The myth's most documented origin is a 1950s United States Army field manual describing cold weather survival experiments in which soldiers wore full Arctic survival suits with no hats. In those experiments, the head did lose the most heat because it was the only uncovered part of the body. Concluding from that experiment that heads are uniquely vulnerable to heat loss is equivalent to covering every drain in a bathtub except one, and concluding that single hole is responsible for all the water leaving. A 2008 study published in the British Medical Journal specifically examined and debunked this claim, confirming heat loss is proportional to exposed surface area across all body regions. The reason hats feel dramatically effective is that the scalp and face are dense in temperature-sensitive nerve receptors, changing your perception of warmth even when total heat retention change is modest. The head is not special. It was just exposed. 18. Shaving makes hair grow back thicker and darker. You've heard this since the first time a razor came anywhere near your body. Delivered as a warning by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you from a consequence that does not exist in any biological system. Hair growth is controlled entirely by the follicle beneath the skin's surface. A razor blade operating at skin level has no contact with the follicle and no mechanism whatsoever to affect it. The perception of thickness after shaving is a geometric illusion. Unshaved hair tapers naturally to a fine point at the tip. When you shave, you cut the hair bluntly across its widest cross-section, so the regrowth feels stubbly and appears coarser, even though the hair shaft itself is completely unchanged in diameter or density. A clinical study from 1928, one of the earliest formal examinations of this question, confirmed no change in hair thickness or growth rate following shaving. This has been replicated repeatedly and is considered settled science. The darker appearance of regrowth follows the same logic. New growth emerges before sun exposure, and environmental weathering can bleach and thin the tip, so it temporarily appears darker until it reaches its normal length. You were afraid of your own razor for years, based on a geometric illusion. The hair was never changing. You just got better at noticing the blunt end and mistaking it for evidence. 19. Human blood is blue inside your body. You've seen the diagrams. You've looked at the veins running visibly beneath your skin, and the evidence seems obvious. The vessels are blue. Therefore, the blood is blue. Therefore, deoxygenated blood running through your veins before it reaches your lungs is a different color than oxygenated blood. Human blood is always red. Deoxygenated blood is a darker, deeper red, a maroon, a burgundy, but it is never, under any physiological circumstances, blue. Blood's color comes entirely from hemoglobin. Oxygenated hemoglobin, called oxyhemoglobin, is bright red. Deoxygenated hemoglobin is dark red. Neither state produces anything resembling blue. Veins appear bluish through the skin because of the physics of light penetration through tissue. Blue and green wavelengths reflect back more readily from superficial layers, regardless of what the vein contains. Blood drawn from a vein during a routine collection is visibly dark red in the collection tube. Any nurse, any blood donor who has watched the process, can confirm this on direct visual inspection. Medical diagrams use blue as a color coding convention for clarity and contrast in printing, not as a biological description of actual blood color. The only animal with genuinely blue blood is the horseshoe crab, which uses copper-based hemocyanin instead of iron-based hemoglobin. You looked at a diagram, skipped the legend, and concluded your blood changes color. The legend was there the whole time. 20. Einstein failed math as a child. It is the single most comforting piece of false information in the history of academic struggle. The universal reassurance that genius is compatible with early failure, delivered to underperforming students by well-meaning adults who never checked whether it was true. Einstein excelled at mathematics from an extremely early age. His school records, examined by historians and biographers, show consistently top marks in mathematics and physics throughout his academic career. At 12 years old, he taught himself algebra and Euclidean geometry over a single summer. By 15, he had independently worked through most of differential and integral calculus. The confusion appears to originate from the Swiss school grading system, which inverted the conventional scale. In the system Einstein attended, 6 was the highest possible grade and 1 was the lowest. Some sources recorded his 6s and misread them as failures in the way a reader unfamiliar with the system would. Einstein did fail his entrance examination to ETH Zurich on his first attempt, specifically in French and botany, not mathematics or physics, and he was 2 years younger than the standard applicant age at the time. 2 Nobel Prizes do not make a man right about everything, but they do suggest he probably passed mathematics. Einstein didn't fail math. We failed to read his report card correctly, which is an irony he would likely have found irritating. 21. Touching a toad gives you warts, a belief so pervasive it has functioned as a reliable deterrent for generations of children interacting with garden amphibians, delivered by adults who genuinely believed a bumpy animal could transmit a skin condition through casual contact. Warts are caused by human papillomavirus, a virus that requires human cellular machinery to replicate and cannot complete its life cycle in amphibian tissue. Cross-species transmission of HPV is not documented in scientific literature. The virus is so specifically adapted to human biology that it cannot establish infection in toad tissue, cannot be carried by toads as a vector, and cannot survive the journey from toad skin to human skin in a form capable of causing disease. The bumps on toad skin are parotoid glands, structures that secrete bufadienolide compounds used as a chemical defense against predators. They are glands, not warts, and they produce a completely different class of biological substance with no relationship to viral skin infection. Medieval European folklore routinely associated toads with witchcraft, disease, and malevolent magic, and the wart myth appears to be a cultural remnant of that broader campaign of amphibian slander. The toad has been accepting blame for HPV since approximately the medieval era. It never had the virus. Its only actual chemical output would be mildly unpleasant if you tried to eat it, which is a different problem entirely requiring a different warning. 22. There are 4 blood types: A, B, AB, and O, positive or negative. 8 categories total. You know yours. You think you understand transfusion compatibility, and you are working with a framework that captures roughly the first sentence of a very long and complicated document. There are over 40 recognized blood group systems and more than 600 known antigens that can appear on red blood cells. The ABO system is the most medically critical for basic compatibility, which is why it receives all the attention, but it is nowhere near the complete picture. The International Society of Blood Transfusion recognizes 43 blood group systems, including RH, Kell, Duffy, Kidd, Lewis, M&S, and dozens of others, each representing a distinct antigen system that can trigger immune reactions if mismatched. The Bombay blood group, an extremely rare phenotype occurring in approximately 1 in 10,000 people in India and far less frequently elsewhere, renders those individuals incompatible with blood from any ABO group, including the supposedly universal O-negative donor type. Hospitals perform extensive cross-matching for surgical patients that tests compatibility across multiple antigen systems simultaneously, a process vastly more complex than ABO-RH matching alone. The 4-type system isn't wrong. It's just the first page of a book you were told was the complete book. The actual book has 600 variables and 43 chapters. 23. Cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. a warning delivered at close range by every parent, grandparent, and disapproving adult who ever sat within earshot of a satisfying joint pop, stated with the absolute authority of someone who has never consulted a single piece of clinical literature on the subject. The cracking sound is produced by cavitation, the rapid collapse of gas-filled bubbles, primarily carbon dioxide, in the synovial fluid of the joint. When the joint capsule is stretched, an internal pressure drops suddenly. It is a fluid mechanics event. It is not structural damage. It is not wear. It is bubbles. Dr. Donald Unger spent 60 years cracking the knuckles on one hand, but not the other. A personal experiment conducted over the course of his entire adult life, reported in the journal Arthritis and Rheumatism, finding no difference whatsoever in arthritis development between the two hands. He received an Ig Nobel Prize for this. Multiple clinical studies, including a 1990 study by Castellanos and Axelrod, found no statistically significant relationship between habitual knuckle cracking and arthritis incidence in any study population. Chronic knuckle cracking has been associated with minor swelling and a slight reduction in grip strength over very long periods. Legitimate annoyances, but categorically not arthritis by any diagnostic definition. A man cracked one hand for 60 years, specifically to win an argument that started in childhood. He won. The hand was fine. 24. Chameleons change color to camouflage themselves. It is their defining trait, the feature that made them iconic. The biological magic trick that put them in every nature documentary about camouflage and every metaphor about adaptability. They change color primarily to argue, to flirt, and to regulate their body temperature. Camouflage is incidental. Research published in Nature Communications in 2015 identified the mechanism. Chameleons control the physical spacing of nanocrystals, called iridophores, in their skin. Wider spacing between crystals reflects longer wavelengths, reds and yellows. Tighter spacing reflects shorter wavelengths, blues and greens. This is a structural color system driven by physics, not a pigment system driven by biochemistry, which is why the color changes can be rapid and dramatic. Male chameleons produce their most vivid, high-contrast color displays when encountering rival males or potential mates. Displays specifically designed to be conspicuous rather than concealing. The biology is producing a signal, not a disguise. Passive chameleons at rest default to colors that blend reasonably with their environment, which is where the camouflage story comes from. It is what they look like when they have nothing to communicate. But placing a chameleon on a bright patterned surface will not produce a matching pattern, because the color range and expression are species specific. The chameleon isn't hiding, it's communicating. Camouflage is just what it looks like when it has nothing to say. 25. Sugar makes children hyperactive, a belief so thoroughly embedded in parental culture that it shapes birthday party planning, Halloween strategy, and holiday dessert decisions for millions of families who are watching for a behavioral effect that controlled science has repeatedly failed to find. A landmark meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1995 reviewed 23 controlled trials examining the relationship between sugar consumption and childhood behavior, and concluded that sugar does not affect the behavior or cognitive performance of children. The methodology that makes this finding most compelling is the blinded parental observation study. Researchers gave children sugar-free drinks and told half the parents their children had received sugar. The parents who believed their children had consumed sugar rated them as significantly more hyperactive, despite the drinks being identical. The hyperactivity was in the observer, not the child. The sugar rush almost certainly reflects context. Sugar is consumed at parties, celebrations, and high-stimulation environments full of other children, noise, games, and social excitement. The hyperactivity comes from the environment. The cake gets the blame because it is present and cannot defend itself. Blood glucose response to sugar consumption is real, but it does not produce neurological overstimulation in children. The physiological mechanism for a rush of the described type does not exist. You watch children run around at a party, noticed they had eaten cake, and drew the wrong conclusion. 26. The forbidden fruit in the Bible was an apple. The image is so universally fixed in Western visual culture that it appears in fine art across 5 centuries. in literature, in advertising, in the symbolic language of temptation and knowledge and catastrophic choice. The book of Genesis never specifies the fruit. The original Hebrew text uses peri, a generic word meaning fruit. No apple, no particular species, no specific botanical identification anywhere in the source material. The apple association gained traction through a Latin pun that proved irresistible to early Christian scholars and artists. The Latin word malum means both apple and evil simultaneously. When early Christian scholars translated Hebrew scripture into Latin in the 4th century CE, producing the Vulgate Bible, the poetic resonance of malum made apples a natural visual choice that required no additional justification. Historical and geographical scholarship notes that apples were not native to the ancient Near East in the forms recognizable today, making them an implausible candidate on agricultural grounds. More regionally accurate candidates include figs, pomegranates, grapes, or wheat, all of which carry symbolic weight in other religious contexts from the same region. John Milton's Paradise Lost, published in 1667, played an enormous role in cementing the apple in the English-speaking Christian imagination. The apple wasn't in the garden. It was in a Latin dictionary and a 17th century epic poem. The snake has been telling a cleaner story than we have. 27. Vitamin C prevents or cures the common cold. You reach for the orange juice, the supplement, the fizzing packet dissolving in a glass. And you do it because Linus Pauling said it works, because Linus Pauling had 2 Nobel Prizes, and because 2 Nobel Prizes feel like sufficient endorsement for a health claim. A comprehensive Cochrane review, published in 2013, analyzed 29 separate controlled trials involving more than 11,000 participants, and concluded that regular vitamin C supplementation does not reduce the incidence of colds in the general population. The claim that it shortens duration holds up slightly better. The average reduction found across trials is less than 1 day, a modest effect that does not match the cultural conviction surrounding the practice. One genuine exception exists. People under extreme physiological stress, marathon runners, soldiers stationed in subarctic conditions, show a statistically significant reduction in cold incidence with supplementation. This suggests a real benefit operating under specific physiological extremes, not a general protective effect across the population. Vitamin C is a legitimate essential nutrient with real functions including collagen synthesis and immune system support. The body maintains saturation at modest intake levels, and excess is excreted. Megadosing produces expensive urine. Linus Pauling was a transcendent chemist who was also, in this specific domain, offering you orange-flavored optimism without the clinical evidence to support it. Drink the juice because it tastes good. It was never medicine. 28. Ostriches bury their heads in the sand when frightened. The image is so embedded in cultural shorthand that denial itself is called ostrich behavior. The bird so iconic as a symbol of willful ignorance that it became a psychological metaphor used in corporate boardrooms and clinical psychology literature. No ostrich has ever been documented burying its head in sand under any observed circumstances by any wildlife researcher in any study. The behavior does not exist. The myth is believed to originate with Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist writing in the 1st century CE, who described ostriches hiding their heads in bushes. A real observable behavior that was then distorted through centuries of retelling until the bush became sand and the concealment became total. Ostriches lower their heads to the ground to turn eggs in their shallow, ground-level nests, to rotate sand during dust bathing, and to feed. From a distance, particularly through heat haze on an open plain, this can appear from certain angles, like head burial. The actual threat response of an ostrich is to run at approximately 45 miles per hour, or to deliver kicks capable of killing a lion. The American Ostrich Association and professional wildlife biologists have noted that in decades of direct observation, head-in-sand behavior has never been documented. We built a metaphor for avoidance around a bird that responds to threats by running 45 miles per hour or committing lion murder. The metaphor teaches entirely the wrong lesson. 29. Humans descended from chimpanzees, stated dismissively, stated to provoke, stated with a confidence that makes evolutionary biologists quietly recalibrate their expectations for the afternoon. Humans did not descend from chimpanzees. Humans and chimpanzees share a common ancestor, a distinct species that no longer exists, from which both lineages diverged approximately 6 to 7 million years ago. The chimpanzee did not give rise to the human. Both gave rise to nothing. Both are the endpoints of their own separate evolutionary trajectories that began from the same starting point. The shared common ancestor was neither a human nor a modern chimpanzee. It was a different species, likely resembling neither, and is the subject of ongoing paleontological research. Modern chimpanzees have been evolving continuously for 6 to 7 million years since that split, just as humans have, which is why the claim that humans came from chimps gets the relationship precisely backwards. Humans share approximately 98.7% of DNA with chimpanzees, a figure that is frequently cited as evidence of close relation. Humans also share roughly 85% with mice, 60% with fruit flies, and 31% with yeast. Genetic similarity describes evolutionary distance, not direct ancestry. The chimpanzee is your cousin, not your grandparent. Your actual ancestor has been extinct for millions of years and looked like neither of you. This is either humbling or interesting, depending on your relationship with your actual cousins. 30. Humans dream in black and white. Many people sincerely believe this about their own sleep experience, and the conviction is so widespread that it shaped psychological and cultural assumptions about the dreaming mind for decades. Most people dream in full color. The belief that dreams are monochrome correlates with extraordinary precision to the era in which people grew up watching black and white television, which is about as direct a confession from the data as you could ask for. Research by psychologist Eva Merzen at the University of Dundee in 2008 found that people who grew up watching black and white television reported significantly higher rates of black and white dreaming than people who grew up with color television. The variable was the media environment, not the neurology of dreaming. Studies that wake participants during REM sleep and ask immediately show more color-rich dream reports than morning questionnaires, suggesting color is present in dreams but poorly encoded in waking memory. Dream journals from before the television era contain frequent color references. Dreamers recorded red sunsets, blue water, green fields, suggesting color dreams predate the question of whether dreams contain color. Your dreams were not black and white. Your television was. The brain borrowed the aesthetic of the technology you spent the most time watching, and you assumed the television was more accurate than your own sleeping mind. The television won, briefly. 31. Flushing a toilet in the southern hemisphere sends the water spinning the opposite direction. A classic international travel promise. Proof of the Coriolis effect made visible in your hotel bathroom. An accessible demonstration of planetary physics available to anyone with a passport and a working toilet. The Coriolis effect is real. It influences large-scale fluid systems. Hurricanes rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere because Earth's rotation deflects moving air masses at the scale of hundreds of kilometers. A toilet bowl is approximately 50 centimeters across. For the Coriolis effect to dominate fluid rotation at that scale, the water would need to sit perfectly still in a perfectly symmetric basin for approximately 24 hours before draining through a geometrically perfect hole. No toilet in the world meets these conditions. Controlled laboratory experiments that eliminate bowl geometry, fill direction, and initial water motion have demonstrated a hemisphere-dependent rotation effect under extraordinarily precise conditions. Those conditions exist nowhere outside a research lab, and certainly not in a hotel bathroom that was filled with moving water 30 seconds ago. In practice, toilets in Australia flush in both directions, depending on the manufacturer's bowl design. Australian plumbers find the question approximately as charming as you would expect. The Earth is rotating. Your toilet is not a precision instrument for measuring it. These are different things, and only one of them is impressive. 32. Eating before swimming causes dangerous cramps that can lead to drowning. A piece of safety advice delivered at every backyard pool, every summer camp, every beach vacation, with the kind of absolute parental authority that requires no citation and tolerates no follow-up questions. The American Red Cross, which is the institution you would consult if this were a real physiological danger, does not include waiting after meals in its water safety guidelines. The recommendation does not appear in modern aquatic safety literature from any credible source. Blood does redirect toward the digestive system after eating, a real process called postprandial hyperemia. But its effect on swimming performance is modest and is not associated with the kind of sudden, incapacitating cramping the myth describes. Competitive swimmers eat within 30 to 60 minutes of training and competition routinely without adverse muscular events of any documented kind. Elite athletic practice directly contradicts the parental rule at the highest level of physical exertion possible. No confirmed drowning has been attributed to meal timing in the scientific or forensic literature. The 30-minute waiting rule appears to originate in early 20th century American health literature as a general caution that was amplified far beyond any supporting evidence over subsequent decades. Children stood at pool edges in summer heat, waiting out a timer based on nothing, while their swim window shortened. The danger was never in the stomach. The rule just sounded protective, and that was sufficient. 33. Hair and fingernails continue growing after death. It appears in horror stories, gets whispered at funerals, and functions as the biological detail that makes death feel less absolute, the body persisting in some minimal way after everything else has stopped. Hair and nails do not grow after death. Growth requires active cellular processes driven by glucose metabolism. Those processes cease entirely at death with the cessation of blood circulation and cellular respiration. What observers have noted and misinterpreted as growth is post-mortem skin dehydration. The tissue shrinks and pulls back from hair follicles and nail beds, exposing portions of the hair shaft and nail plate that were previously covered by living skin. The hair appears longer because the frame around it contracted, not because the hair extended. This biological reality has been clearly understood by forensic pathologists and mortuary professionals for well over a century. It is not a scientific mystery. It is a well-characterized post-mortem change with a straightforward physical explanation. The myth may serve a psychological function across cultures, softening the finality of death by suggesting biological continuation, providing a transitional narrative that makes the immediate aftermath of loss slightly more tolerable. Every ghost story that used growing hair as a detail of supernatural persistence was actually describing dehydration. The haunting was always tissue retraction. The body does not keep going. The skin simply shrinks, and the gap looks, from a distance, like growth. 34. The Great Pyramids of Egypt were built by enslaved people driven under compulsion through suffering and force. Thousands of people with no choice, no compensation, and no identity, producing monuments to a pharaoh's power through sheer miserable quantity. Archaeological evidence gathered from the excavation of a workers' village near Giza tells a substantially different story. The site, excavated beginning in the 1990s by Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, revealed organized settlements with bakeries, breweries, fish processing facilities, and medical infrastructure. Logistics consistent with feeding, housing, and caring for a large managed workforce, not with running a slave camp where individual welfare is irrelevant. Worker skeletons found at the site show evidence of surgical bone setting and recovery from complex injuries. Medical intervention that is not extended to expendable labor in any historical context where such records exist. Graffiti found inside pyramid structures includes team nicknames that workers gave themselves: Friends of Khufu, Drunkards of Menkaure. These are the marks of people with group identity and pride in their work, not the anonymous traces of coerced labor. Administrative papyri from the era describe ration records, labor rotations, and organizational hierarchies consistent with a large, structured workforce. The most impressive construction project of the ancient world was built by organized workers who gave their crews boastful nicknames. History replaced them with suffering because suffering is more dramatic. The workers deserved a better story. They built one. We just stopped reading it. 35. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth, the highest point, the ultimate summit, the definitive answer to the question every geography teacher has asked and every student has confidently answered. Everest is the highest mountain above sea level. It is not the tallest mountain on Earth. That distinction belongs to Mauna Kea in Hawaii, and it isn't particularly close. Mauna Kea rises approximately 33,500 feet from its base on the Pacific Ocean floor to its summit. Everest reaches 29,032 feet above sea level. The difference exists because roughly 19,700 feet of Mauna Kea sits below the ocean surface, invisible in the standard measurement that everyone uses without acknowledging it is a measurement choice rather than a physical fact. A third contender exists for the title of farthest point from Earth's center. Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador, which at just over 20,000 feet above sea level sits closer to space than Everest because of the equatorial bulge that makes Earth wider at its middle than at its poles. The question, what is the tallest mountain, has at least three defensible correct answers, depending entirely on which definition you apply. School taught you one definition and presented it as the only definition. Everest is the highest. Mauna Kea is the tallest. Chimborazo is the farthest from the center. All three are correct. None of them is the complete answer. 36. Columbus sailed in 1492 to prove the Earth was round, bravely defying a flat Earth medieval establishment that feared he would reach the edge and sail off into nothing. One of the most satisfying scientific courage narratives in popular history, and almost entirely fabricated. Educated Europeans had accepted the Earth's spherical shape for over 1,500 years before Columbus left the port. Ancient Greek mathematician Eratosthenes calculated Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy around 240 BCE using shadow angles and geometry, arriving at an estimate within a few percent of the correct value. By the medieval period, the spherical Earth was standard educated European understanding, incorporated into university curricula, astronomical models, and accepted by the Catholic Church. The institution Columbus approached for funding. His actual dispute with the Spanish royal advisors was about numbers, not shape. Columbus substantially underestimated Earth's circumference and believed Asia was far closer westward than it actually is. His advisors correctly believed the westward distance to Asia was too great to survive. Columbus was wrong about the calculation. His critics were right. He stumbled onto an unknown continent precisely because his math was off. The flat Earth medieval opposition was largely invented by Washington Irving in a fictional biography of Columbus published in 1828. Columbus didn't prove the Earth is round. He proved his critics were correct about the distance and accidentally discovered a continent in the process. We built a holiday around the wrong lesson. 37. The far side of the moon is permanently dark. Mysterious, lightless, the shadow side of Earth's only natural satellite. Forever in darkness because it never faces the sun. The far side of the moon receives exactly the same total amount of sunlight as the near side over the course of a lunar cycle. During a new moon, when the moon appears completely dark from Earth's surface, the far side is fully illuminated. It is, at that precise moment, the bright side. The moon rotates synchronously with its orbit around Earth, meaning one face always points toward Earth due to gravitational tidal locking. This does not mean one face is always dark. It means one face always points toward you, which is a completely different physical fact. The lunar far side does experience longer individual nights than the near side, approximately 15 Earth days of darkness, followed by 15 Earth days of direct sunlight. But this is a longer cycle, not perpetual darkness. China's Chang'e 4 mission landed on the far side in January 2019, the first soft landing ever achieved there, and required a relay satellite not because the far side lacks sunlight, but because Earth's bulk blocks direct radio communication. The lander had no shortage of solar power. Dark side means unknown, not unlit. The far side has been receiving sunlight for 4.5 billion years. It just doesn't have an audience. 38. Alcohol warms you up in cold weather. The flask in the winter coat. The shot before going out into the frost. The brandy barrel around the St. Bernard's neck. The entire cultural architecture of alcohol as thermal protection. Alcohol causes peripheral vasodilation. It forces warm blood from your body's core toward your skin surface, creating a genuine flush of warmth sensation at the skin level, while simultaneously accelerating the rate at which your body heat escapes to the surrounding cold environment. You feel warmer. You are becoming colder. These two things are happening at the same time, and only one of them is accurate. The sensation is the physiology lying to you about the direction heat is traveling. Alcohol also inhibits vasopressin, contributing to the vasodilation effect, and impairs thermoregulatory shivering, the body's primary mechanism for generating heat in cold environments. You are simultaneously losing heat faster and generating less heat to compensate, while your brain receives signals that everything is fine and possibly enjoyable. Hypothermia deaths in cold weather environments are disproportionately associated with alcohol consumption. The false sensation of warmth causes people to underestimate their exposure and fail to seek shelter at the moment shelter matters most. Alcohol opens the windows of your house in winter while making you feel like you've turned the heat up. The warmth is real. The direction it's traveling is the entire problem. 39. Survival of the fittest means survival of the strongest. The most physically powerful, the most aggressive, the most dominant, the winner of direct competition for resources and territory. This interpretation has been used to justify an enormous range of human behaviors that Charles Darwin never described, and Herbert Spencer, who actually coined the phrase in 1864, did not intend in any purely physical sense. Fitness in evolutionary biology means best adapted to the current environment's specific demands. Not strongest, not fastest, not most aggressive. The organism that is fittest in a given context may be the smallest, most metabolically efficient, most cooperative, or most reproductively flexible. Context determines fitness entirely, which is why fitness is not a fixed quality, but a relationship between an organism and its environment. During the mass extinction event 66 million years ago, being the largest and most metabolically demanding organism on Earth was catastrophically unfit. Small, opportunistic generalists survived because the environment had changed what fitness required. Cooperation and altruism are extensively documented fitness strategies. Eusocial insects, symbiotic relationships, and human social structures all demonstrate that collaborative behavior produces survival advantages that no individual aggression strategy can match. Bacteria, single-celled, non-aggressive, non-muscular, are by any evolutionary metric the most successful organisms that have ever existed, having persisted for 3.5 billion years across every environment the planet offers. The word fittest was always about the environment's requirements. The environment never asked for biceps. 40. You should never wake a sleepwalker. A rule stated with the absolute certainty of medical fact by people who have never been asked to cite the mechanism behind it, delivered as a protection for the sleepwalker from consequences that do not exist. Waking a sleepwalker is not dangerous to them. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine and sleep researchers broadly agree there is no documented physiological danger. No cardiac events, no psychological breaks, no lasting neurological damage attributable to the waking itself in any clinical literature. Waking a sleepwalker causes brief disorientation and confusion. An unpleasant experience. Disorienting for the person, occasionally startling for everyone present, but not a medical emergency, and typically resolved within minutes as normal waking orientation returns. The actual safety concern runs in precisely the opposite direction. Not waking a sleepwalker allows someone with low environmental awareness and impaired judgment to continue moving through a space containing staircases, open windows, kitchen appliances, and exterior doors. The danger in a sleepwalking situation is not the person who wakes them. It is the staircase that the sleepwalker is approaching while the observer stands still, paralyzed by a rule with no mechanism behind it. The myth's origin is unclear, but may reflect a generalized cultural instinct against disrupting sleep states that hardened into a specific prohibition. The real threat was always the stairs. It was never the waking. 41. Sushi means raw fish. It is how the dish is described, how it is ordered, how it is avoided by people who find raw fish objectionable, and how it is defined in casual conversation across virtually every English-speaking context. The word sushi refers specifically to vinegared rice. The defining ingredient is the seasoned rice preparation. The toppings, fillings, and accompaniments are separate variables that can include raw fish, cooked seafood, vegetables, tofu, egg, or nothing beyond the rice itself. A cucumber roll is sushi. A bowl of raw salmon without rice is not sushi. It is sashimi, which is a distinct dish with its own name in the cuisine from which both originate. Shrimp nigiri, one of the most commonly ordered items in Japanese restaurants, uses boiled shrimp. Unagi, eel, is grilled. Numerous rolls contain tempura fried components. Calling all of these raw fish fails on basic descriptive grounds. Historically, early forms of the dish called narazushi involved fish fermented in rice over months for preservation. The rice was discarded, and only the fish was consumed. The dish has evolved substantially over centuries into forms where the rice is central rather than incidental. You have been defining an entire cuisine by an optional component while ignoring the ingredient the word is literally constructed around. The rice is the sushi. The fish was always optional. 42. You can't report a missing person for 24 hours. The procedural rule of every crime drama. The bureaucratic obstacle that creates the tension in the first act of every thriller. Repeated so consistently across decades of television that real people apply it in real emergencies during the window when acting would be most effective. There is no law, no federal regulation, and no policy in any United States state requiring a 24-hour waiting period before filing a missing persons report. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children states this explicitly. The FBI states this explicitly. Law enforcement can act immediately, and for vulnerable populations, children, elderly individuals, people with medical conditions, immediate action is specifically recommended. The first hours following a disappearance are statistically the most critical window for outcome. Forensic and investigative resources become more effective the earlier they are deployed, not less. The myth is so pervasive that police departments across the country have issued public corrections specifically targeting this belief because it was causing measurable harm to real investigations. The most likely origin is older localized police discretion. Some departments historically deprioritized adult missing person reports initially, which was a policy preference subject to criticism, never a legal requirement. Television formalized a discretionary practice into a universal rule, repeated it until it felt like law, and people stopped reporting during the hours that mattered most. 43. Bulls charge because they see red. The matador's cape, the color of fury, the trigger for a ton of muscle, an instinct bearing down at full speed. The color red is physiologically invisible to a bull as a distinct stimulus. Cattle are dichromats. Their visual system contains two types of color receptors, rather than the three humans possess, which means they cannot distinguish red from green. Both appear as a similar, muted, undifferentiated tone. The bull in a corrida is not responding to the color of the cape. It is responding to the movement of the cape, the provocations of the matador and his team, and the sustained agitation of an environment designed specifically to produce that response. Studies presenting bulls with stationary capes in red, blue, and white found no preferential charging toward red. The bulls responded to whatever moved, regardless of color. The red color of the traditional muleta serves one practical purpose entirely unrelated to the animal's psychology: masking blood stains during the performance. It is a choice made for the audience's visual experience and the aesthetic presentation of the spectacle. The animal sees none of the meaning humans have projected onto it. Every piece of cultural weight carried by the red cape, passion, danger, provocation, was constructed for you, the observer. The bull charged the movement. The color was always your drama. 44. We only use 10% of our DNA, and the rest is junk. Evolutionary leftovers, broken gene fragments, molecular noise filling 90% of your genome with biological clutter that serves no purpose and represents the accumulated debris of 3.5 billion years of imperfect replication. The ENCODE project, the Encyclopedia of DNA Elements, published results in 2012 from a collaboration involving 442 scientists across 32 institutions who analyzed the entire human genome systematically. They identified biochemical activity in approximately 80% of it. The term junk DNA was coined by geneticist Susumu Ono in 1972 to describe non-protein coding sequences. At the time, function was equated with protein coding, which represents only about 1.5 to 2% of the genome. The remaining sequences were classified by their apparent lack of the only function anyone was measuring. Non-coding DNA includes regulatory sequences, promoters, enhancers, silencers, that control when and how genes are expressed without coding for proteins themselves. These regions are demonstrably functional, and mutations within them cause disease. The proportion that is genuinely non-functional is actively debated, with estimates ranging considerably. What is not debated is whether junk is an accurate characterization of the whole. You called 90% of your genome trash for 4 decades and then found it was largely running your biology. The junk drawer was the control room. 45. The appendix is a useless evolutionary leftover, a vestigial organ with no function, a remnant of digestive machinery from distant ancestors that the human body simply hasn't gotten around to eliminating, existing only to become infected and require emergency surgery. Research published in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology in 2017 analyzed 533 mammal species and found the appendix has evolved independently at least 32 separate times across unrelated lineages. Structures that evolve repeatedly across unrelated lineages are almost never genuinely functionless. Evolution does not consistently reinvent purposeless anatomy. The appendix is rich in lymphatic tissue and is associated with gut-associated lymphoid tissue function, playing a documented role in immune system development, particularly in early life. Duke University researchers proposed in 2007 that the appendix functions as a reservoir for beneficial gut bacteria. After severe diarrheal illnesses that flush the intestinal microbiome, the appendix may help recolonize the gut with bacteria necessary for normal digestion and immune function. Populations who have undergone appendectomy show no dramatic health difference in modern medical contexts, where alternatives are readily available. In pre-modern environments without medical infrastructure, maintaining a functional gut microbiome reservoir after illness may have provided meaningful survival advantage. You called it useless for 150 years because you didn't know what it was doing. That is a diagnostic failure, not an organ failure. It was doing its job. You just weren't watching. 46. The metric system is used everywhere except the United States, America as the lone holdout, the stubborn, isolated nation clinging to inches and miles and Fahrenheit while the rest of the world has standardized around a rational system. The United States officially adopted the metric system in 1866. It is the legal standard for science, medicine, military operations, and international industry in America. Every medication you have ever taken was dosed in milligrams or milliliters. Every American scientific paper published in a peer-reviewed journal uses metric units. Every piece of military equipment is specified in metric. The 2-liter soda bottle is the most common large beverage container in the United States, purchased without confusion by people who claim not to use metric. The Metric Conversion Act of 1975 designated metric as the preferred measurement system. It was not made mandatory for daily civilian life, which is where the cultural resistance has remained concentrated. The practical holdout is road signs and recipe cards, not medicine, not science, not industry. Myanmar and Liberia, the 2 other countries most often cited alongside the United States in this context, have both made significant formal moves toward metric adoption, making the 3 holdout countries framing increasingly outdated. America uses metric in every context that actually matters. The argument is about miles. The medicine was always in milligrams. 47. Fortune cookies are a traditional Chinese invention. They arrive at the end of every Chinese restaurant meal in America. They feel ancient and imported, and they have approximately as much historical connection to China as a corn dog. The most documented origin traces to Makoto Hagiwara, a Japanese-American landscape designer who served cookies containing thank you notes at the Japanese Tea Garden in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park around 1914. A competing claim involves David Young, a Chinese-American noodle manufacturer in Los Angeles around 1918. A mock court in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Hagiwara claim in 1983 in a verdict that was advisory rather than legally binding, but represented the weight of available historical evidence. Fortune cookies entered Chinese-American restaurants primarily after World War II, when Japanese-American internment disrupted Japanese-American businesses, and Chinese-American restaurants expanded to fill the resulting market gap. A direct economic and historical connection that explains the adoption without requiring a Chinese origin. When fortune cookies were introduced to China in the 1990s, they were marketed as genuine American fortune cookies. China received them as an American import. The most iconic symbol of Chinese restaurants in America was invented in California by a Japanese-American man, adopted by Chinese-American restaurants for commercial reasons, and then exported to China, labeled as American. The fortune cookie contains multitudes. None of them are Chinese. 48. Humans are the only species that kills for reasons beyond immediate survival need. It is the darkest argument in the naturalist's toolkit, the claim that uniquely positions human violence as a category apart from everything else in the animal world, a moral singularity in an otherwise amoral nature. Multiple non-human species engage in killing behavior that exceeds immediate survival requirement, documented under rigorous observational conditions. Dolphins have been documented killing harbor porpoises in behavior that provides no feeding benefit. Researchers describe it as surplus killing, with evidence of deliberate, repeated violent attacks resulting in death without consumption. Chimpanzee warfare, coordinated territorial raids between social groups, resulting in systematic lethal violence against rival males, has been extensively documented by primatologists, including Jane Goodall at Gombe. The Gombe Chimpanzee War, observed from 1974 to 1978, involved the organized killing of males from a rival community over territorial control. Meerkats have one of the highest intraspecific killing rates of any mammal studied. Dominant females routinely kill subordinate females' offspring to concentrate resources toward their own young. Domestic cats are documented surplus killers, routinely killing prey they do not consume, a behavior so well established it influences conservation policy near bird nesting sites. Humans are not uniquely violent. They are uniquely vocal about how unique they are. The chimpanzee coordinated a war. You are the only one writing essays about it. 49. Computers and technology are making humans less intelligent. Every generation delivers this verdict on the technology of the next generation, and every generation has been wrong with a consistency that should by now constitute its own pattern of evidence. Average IQ scores have risen significantly in every country, where they have been systematically measured over the 20th century. This phenomenon, documented and named by political scientist James Flynn in the 1980s, describes a consistent rise of approximately 3 IQ points per decade across tested populations in dozens of countries over generations of measurement. Flynn proposed that the gains relate to the increasing demands modern life places on abstract reasoning, navigating complex bureaucratic systems, hypothetical thinking, visual spatial problem solving, and symbolic representation exercises, cognitive capacities that pre-modern daily life did not demand with comparable frequency or intensity. Some recent studies have identified a slowing or modest reversal of the Flynn effect in certain Scandinavian countries since the 1990s, with researchers proposing multiple possible explanations, including changes in education and media consumption. The causal picture remains actively contested. The historical anxiety about cognitive decline from new technology has precise precedents. Socrates warned that writing would destroy memory. The printing press was accused of spreading dangerous ideas faster than society could process. The novel was considered corrupting. Every generation has been certain that this technology finally breaks human cognition. The scoreboard reads, 0 confirmed extinctions from calculators. 50. Lightning rods attract lightning and make buildings more dangerous. Raising a metal rod above a structure is an invitation, a flag planted in the electrical landscape saying strike here, increasing risk rather than managing it. Lightning rods do not attract lightning. They provide a controlled, low-resistance path for lightning that would have struck in the area regardless of the rod's presence, channeling the discharge harmlessly to ground rather than through the building's structure, wiring, plumbing, or occupants. Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod around 1752, and documented the mechanism in his own writing. The rod does not cause lightning. It ensures that if lightning strikes nearby, it travels predictably along the rod and cable to ground, rather than unpredictably, through whatever path offers least resistance in the building. Buildings without rods in lightning-prone areas are not safer. They are struck with the same probability, governed by the same physics, but without a controlled discharge path, meaning the current travels through walls, structural materials, or wiring, causing fires and physical damage. The Catholic Church initially opposed Franklin's rods on theological grounds, holding that storms were divine acts and redirecting them was impious interference. Church buildings, frequently the tallest structures in their towns, suffered disproportionate lightning fire damage until rods were adopted. The rod doesn't invite danger. It domesticates danger that was arriving regardless. The building without a rod isn't avoiding the strike. It's just receiving it with no plan. 51. The tongue is the strongest muscle in the human body. It appears at trivia nights. It gets delivered by gym teachers who think they're being clever. And it is meaningless as a factual claim because strongest requires a definition before it can have an answer. And by every measurable definition, the tongue doesn't win. Muscular strength can be measured by absolute force generated, by endurance sustained over time, or by work done relative to the muscle's own size. By absolute force, the masseter, the jaw muscle responsible for biting, generates approximately 200 pounds of measurable pressure, the greatest force per square centimeter of any skeletal muscle in the body. By endurance, the heart contracts over 3 billion times in an average lifetime without rest, a record nothing else approaches. The soleus, a calf muscle, sustains postural load across an entire standing day, with a consistency no other skeletal muscle matches. The tongue itself is not a single muscle. It is a hydrostat composed of 8 interwoven muscle groups working in coordination, calling it the tongue, as a single competing muscle misrepresents its anatomy. The claim appears in no peer-reviewed anatomical literature as a factual statement. It is absent from physiology textbooks and exists exclusively in popular trivia culture, passed between people who feel clever for knowing it. The tongue performs extraordinary things simultaneously. It did not need to be the strongest. Whoever added that to its resume was doing it a disservice. 52. You should pee on a jellyfish sting. Someone is stung at the beach, the crowd immediately knows the protocol, and a television sitcom with a live studio audience confirmed the clinical validity of urinating on another person in a public setting approximately 27 years ago. Jellyfish tentacles contain nematocysts, microscopic spring-loaded venom capsules that remain active on skin after the tentacle detaches from the animal. They discharge in response to changes in osmotic pressure or chemical environment at the contact site. Human urine contains fresh water, urea, and other compounds that create precisely the kind of osmotic shift capable of triggering remaining nematocysts to fire additional venom into the skin. The treatment makes the sting worse. This is not a marginal effect. You are actively causing more venom to be delivered, while simultaneously making the situation socially catastrophic for everyone on the beach. The most consistently recommended first aid for marine biologists and emergency medicine: rinse with seawater, not fresh water. Apply vinegar for box jellyfish stings specifically. Use tweezers or a card edge to remove visible tentacle material, and apply heat or topical anesthetic for pain. A 1997 episode of a major American comedy series depicted the urine treatment as established medical fact to an audience estimated in the tens of millions. No physician was consulted in the writing of that scene. The nematocysts were grateful for the additional firing opportunity. 53. Diamonds are indestructible. The hardest substance on Earth, the geological embodiment of permanence, the material chosen to represent eternal commitment, precisely because nothing can break it. Diamonds can be shattered by a hammer blow, burned in a standard furnace, and are thermodynamically converting to graphite at room temperature right now, at a rate so slow it is measured in geological timescales, but at a direction that is not toward permanence. Hardness and toughness are different material properties measuring different things. Hardness measures resistance to scratching. Diamonds score 10 on the Mohs scale, the maximum. Toughness measures resistance to fracturing, and diamonds rate only fair to good on toughness scales because of cleavage planes, directions of atomic weakness along which the crystal structure splits cleanly when struck correctly. At temperatures above approximately 700 degrees Celsius in the presence of oxygen, diamonds combust and convert to carbon dioxide. A house fire can destroy a diamond. Thermodynamically, graphite is the stable form of carbon at room temperature and pressure. Diamond is metastable, a higher energy arrangement that persists because the conversion rate is cosmically slow, not because it is the lowest energy state. The phrase "diamonds are forever" was created by an advertising agency for De Beers in 1947 and ranked the most effective advertising slogan of the 20th century. The diamond is not forever. The marketing campaign is what lasted. 54. Your appendix is completely useless, covered in item 45. So here instead is the myth that the tongue map is real, that different zones of your tongue taste different things. Sweet at the tip, bitter at the back, salty and sour arranged on the sides in clean, teachable regions that fit neatly into a classroom diagram and have no basis in how taste receptor cells are actually distributed. Every taste quality, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, is processed by receptor cells distributed across the entire tongue surface with no meaningful regional exclusivity. The 1901 German paper by D.P. Honig that spawned the diagram showed only marginal sensitivity differences across regions, not the discrete exclusive zones the diagram depicted. Individual taste buds contain receptor cells for multiple taste qualities simultaneously. A single taste bud is not dedicated to one flavor. Taste buds also exist on the soft palate, the epiglottis, and portions of the upper esophagus. The tongue map was already wrong about where tasting happens before it was wrong about the zones. This diagram survived in educational materials for approximately 70 years after the underlying claim was understood to be a misrepresentation. Generations of students memorized the diagram based on a misread paper from 1901. Your taste buds were distributing information correctly the entire time. The diagram was the problem. Your tongue never needed a map. 55. The metric system is foreign to Americans. Covered above, so here instead is the myth that glass is a slow-moving liquid. Old window panes are thicker at the bottom than the top, which appears to be evidence of centuries of slow gravitational flow. Glass, behaving like an extraordinarily viscous liquid, moving imperceptibly toward the ground across human timescales. Old glass is thicker at the bottom because of how it was manufactured, not because it flowed there. Medieval and early modern glass was produced using the broad sheet method. Molten glass was spun into a cylinder, split lengthwise, and laid flat to cool. This process produced panes of inherently uneven thickness. Glassmakers conventionally installed these panes thick side down for physical stability, which is why surviving historical windows are consistently thicker at the bottom. If glass were actually flowing at room temperature, ancient Egyptian glass artifacts over 3,000 years old and Roman glass objects would show measurable thickness redistribution. They do not. The viscosity of silicate glass at room temperature is estimated at approximately 10 to the 23rd poise. The Earth's mantle, which flows measurably over geological time, has a viscosity of roughly 10 to the 21st poise. Glass at room temperature flows less readily than the ground beneath your feet. The carpenter installed it thick side down. The physics was never the explanation. 56. Fortune cookies are Chinese. Covered above. So here instead is the myth that eating turkey makes you sleepy because of tryptophan. You eat the holiday meal, you move to the couch, and the turkey gets the blame with the confident backing of amino acid science. Turkey contains tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin and melatonin, and does play a role in sleep regulation. Turkey does not contain unusual amounts of it. Chicken contains comparable levels. Parmesan cheese contains approximately 490 milligrams of tryptophan per 100 grams. Turkey contains approximately 250 to 310 milligrams per 100 grams. The food most commonly cited as uniquely sleep-inducing is not the highest dietary source of the compound it supposedly delivers in soporific quantities. Dietary tryptophan must also compete with other large neutral amino acids to cross the blood-brain barrier, and protein-rich meals like turkey actually reduce tryptophan's brain uptake relative to carbohydrate-heavy meals, making the mechanism work against the myth's own logic. The genuine causes of the post-meal drowsiness: a caloric intake that may reach 4,000 calories in a single sitting, insulin response to carbohydrate-heavy side dishes, warm indoor environments, alcohol consumption, and the accumulated social energy expenditure of a large family gathering. You ate an enormous amount of food, drank wine, and sat in a warm room. The turkey has been accepting that accusation without complaint for decades. It was never the turkey. 57. Humans sink completely in quicksand. An entire generation of adventure films treated quicksand as one of the most lethal natural terrain hazards imaginable. A soft, innocent surface that swallowed victims to full submersion. Human body density is approximately 1 gram per cubic centimeter. Quicksand density ranges from approximately 2 grams per cubic centimeter. Humans float in quicksand at roughly half immersion by basic buoyancy physics. You will sink to approximately waist depth and stop. Full submersion is physically impossible for a human body in quicksand under standard conditions. A 2005 study published in Nature by physicist Daniel Bohn at the University of Amsterdam experimentally measured human sinking in quicksand analog materials and confirmed the buoyancy ceiling. Subjects reached approximately waist depth, and the physics stopped further descent regardless of movement or weight distribution. The actual danger of quicksand is not drowning, but immobilization, becoming trapped at waist depth in a remote location with limited ability to self-extract, potentially exposed to tidal flooding, weather, or dehydration over time. Extraction requires slow, patient movement to introduce water and reduce suction rather than the frantic struggling that makes extraction harder. An analysis of American film archives found quicksand appeared as a plot threat in approximately 3% of films from the 1960s. Cinema prepared you for the wrong problem. The correct problem is being stuck. The solution is patience, not panic. 58. Technology is making humans less intelligent. Covered above, so here the myth is that you can tell when someone is staring at you. Everyone experiences it. The prickling certainty that eyes are on you. The urge to turn around. The social radar that seems to operate beyond your ordinary senses. Controlled studies consistently find that humans cannot reliably detect when they are being stared at under blinded experimental conditions. Multiple experiments by researchers, including Marianne Wiseman, using controlled protocols. Observers behind one-way glass. Randomized staring and non-staring trials. Subjects unable to access any conventional sensory information about the observer. Produce accuracy results at or below chance level. 50%. Indistinguishable from guessing. The sensation's existence is explicable without any additional mechanism. Humans in social environments are hypervigilant to the possibility of being observed, a state that produces frequent false positives. You notice and remember the times you felt watched and turned to find someone looking. You do not notice or record the many times you felt watched and found no one, or the times you were watched and felt nothing. Confirmation bias does the rest of the accounting. The posterior superior temporal sulcus processes gaze direction information, and the body registers social cues genuinely. But the system is not reliably detecting surveillance beyond available sensory inputs. You don't know when you're being watched. You know when you're anxious about it, which is frequently. The sensor is real. Its accuracy is not. 59. Lightning rods attract lightning. Covered in 50. So here instead, the myth that the Roman Empire fell because of lead poisoning. The Romans used lead pipes, lead-glazed vessels, lead-sweetened wine, lead cosmetics, and the accumulated neurological damage from this exposure drove the greatest empire in Western history into terminal decline. Lead exposure in ancient Rome was real and documented. Skeletal analysis of Roman-era remains shows elevated bone lead levels, and ancient physicians, including Vitruvius, warned against lead pipes and recommended clay alternatives. That part is historically accurate. Attributing Rome's fall primarily to lead poisoning is not. Roman lead exposure was not uniform across the population. Wealthy urban residents who consumed lead vessel wine and used lead tableware had higher exposure than rural or lower-class populations who lacked access to those luxury goods. Mass civilizational neurological decline from uniform poisoning is demographically implausible given those exposure gradients. Rome's actual collapse is attributed by modern historians to a combination of military overstretching, political instability. The crisis of the 3rd century produced approximately 50 emperors across 50 years, economic deterioration, climate shifts, and successive pandemic diseases, including the Antonine Plague and the Plague of Cyprian. The lead hypothesis was popularized by historian S.C. Gilfillan in the 1960s. It lacks the demographic and epidemiological evidence to support a civilizational causal claim. Empires don't fall because of one pipe. They fall because of everything, simultaneously. 60. Carrots were always orange. The default carrot, the natural carrot, the carrot as nature originally produced it before human cultivation. The vegetable that has always been the specific shade appearing in every children's illustration and every grocery produce section. Wild and originally cultivated carrots were purple, white, and yellow. These colors reflect natural pigment compounds, anthocyanins producing purple, carotenoids producing yellow, present in the ancestral forms of the plant domesticated in the Afghanistan and Iran region approximately 1,000 years ago. Orange carrots were selectively bred in the Netherlands in the 16th or 17th century from yellow varieties, specifically developing high beta-carotene content through deliberate agricultural selection. The popular claim connecting Dutch orange carrot development to the House of Orange, the Dutch royal dynasty, is historically plausible given the timing and the political context of Dutch national identity in that period, but is not definitively documented and may be partially apocryphal. What is documented is that orange carrots became dominant across Europe through Dutch agricultural distribution networks and have remained the commercial standard for approximately 4 centuries. Purple, white, yellow, and red carrot varieties never disappeared. They are sold as heirloom varieties today. The orange carrot's dominance is 400 years of agricultural standardization, not natural history. If the Netherlands had different royalty, your child's cartoon rabbit might be holding something purple, and the default crayon color would need a different name. 61. Mount Everest is the hardest mountain to climb, the highest point on Earth, the ultimate mountaineering challenge, the summit that defines the outer limit of human physical achievement against terrain. Everest is among the most commercially accessible major peaks in the world by most objective measures of what hard to climb means in practice. Everest's summit success rate for attempted expeditions has reached approximately 29 to 30% in recent decades. A figure made possible by an extensive permanent infrastructure of fixed ropes along standard routes, supplemental oxygen systems, and highly experienced high-altitude guides. The primary physiological challenge of Everest is altitude-induced hypoxia, not technical climbing difficulty. The standard South Col route involves no technical climbing beyond the capabilities of experienced recreational mountaineers with sufficient acclimatization time and supplemental oxygen support. Annapurna Mai, at 8,091 meters in Nepal, has a historical fatality to summit ratio of approximately 1 death for every 3 successful summits, among the highest of any major peak. K2, at 8,611 meters in Pakistan, was not successfully summited in winter until January 2021, when a Nepali team achieved the first winter ascent after decades of failed attempts by elite climbers. Everest is the most famous mountain and the hardest place to breathe at the top. It is not the hardest mountain to climb. The hardest mountains have dramatically fewer photographs taken at their summits. That absence of documentation is the clearest measure of actual difficulty available. 62. Eating carrots improves your eyesight. A piece of dietary advice delivered with enough frequency and enough apparent nutritional logic that generations of people have eaten carrots specifically hoping to see better in low light or improve their general visual acuity. Vitamin A, which the body synthesizes from beta-carotene in carrots, is essential for the production of rhodopsin, a photopigment in rod cells responsible for low light vision. Severe vitamin A deficiency causes night blindness and can lead to permanent vision damage, including total blindness in extreme cases. That part is true and important. For a person with normal, adequate vitamin A levels, which describes the vast majority of people in countries where carrot consumption is high enough to produce the myth. Consuming additional carrots or vitamin A supplements produces no measurable improvement in visual acuity, night vision, or any other vision parameter. You cannot exceed normal biological function by oversupplying the input once the system is already operating at capacity. The wartime British propaganda campaign is the most documented amplification of this myth at scale. The Royal Air Force credited radar-assisted nighttime interceptions to pilot carrot consumption, specifically to conceal radar technology from German intelligence. The intelligence operation succeeded. The carrot myth was the cover story. Lutein and zeaxanthin, found in leafy greens and eggs, not meaningfully in carrots, have genuine evidence supporting their role in reducing age-related macular degeneration risk. The carrot got the credit for the radar. It has been getting credit for things it didn't do ever since. 63. Humans are born with an innate fear of snakes and spiders. It is biological, primal, hardwired through millions of years of coevolution with venomous animals, installed before birth as a survival mechanism that requires no learning to activate. Studies with human infants show no automatic fear response to snakes or spiders. Babies presented with images of snakes do look longer at them than at images of flowers or caterpillars, suggesting enhanced perceptual detection, an attentional bias toward the stimulus. Attention and fear are different neurological systems, and the attentional bias is present without the emotional fear response. Cross-cultural studies show significant variation in snake phobia rates. Populations from isolated island environments or Arctic communities with minimal historical snake encounters show substantially lower rates of ophidiophobia than populations from regions where venomous snakes are common terrain features. If the fear were purely innate and universal, cultural and geographic variation of that magnitude would not exist. The prepared learning hypothesis, proposed by psychologist Martin Seligman in 1971, offers the more accurate framework. Humans are biologically prepared to rapidly associate certain stimuli, snakes, spiders, heights, enclosed spaces, with fear. Not born afraid, but built to learn the fear unusually quickly and retain it unusually persistently once acquired. You weren't born afraid of snakes. You were born with an extremely fast trigger. Your ancestors pulled it. You inherited the reflex speed, not the loaded chamber. 64. Abner Doubleday invented baseball in Cooperstown, New York, in 1839. It is American mythology with a specific location and a specific year and a specific founding figure, which is exactly the kind of precision that makes a false history feel credible. Abner Doubleday almost certainly did not invent baseball. He never claimed to have done so. He left no documentation suggesting any connection to the game in any of his extensive writings, letters, or military memoirs, remarkable for a man who reportedly invented a national pastime. In 1839, he was at West Point Military Academy, not Cooperstown. The Doubleday origin story was constructed by the Mills Commission of 1907, appointed by sporting goods magnate Albert Spalding, which sought to establish baseball as a purely American invention to counter mounting evidence of its British origins. The commission's primary evidence was a letter from a man named Abner Graves, claiming childhood memories from Cooperstown. Later investigation revealed Graves was a convicted murderer, whose reliability was, at minimum, questionable. Baseball evolved from British bat and ball games, with references to baseball appearing in British documents as early as 1744. Alexander Cartwright codified modern rules for the New York Knickerbocker Club in 1845. The Hall of Fame is in Cooperstown because the story needed a setting. America's pastime was invented in commission meetings by a sporting goods salesman who needed a better origin story. The story won. The history lost. 65. Glass is a slow-moving liquid. Covered in 55. So here instead is the myth that peeing on a jellyfish sting works. Covered in 52. Here then is the myth that the word rule of thumb comes from a law permitting men to beat their wives with a stick no thicker than a thumb. It is repeated in gender studies courses, cited in court cases, and spread through popular culture as a documented piece of legal history that validates discussion of historical domestic violence. Legal historian Henry Ansgar Kelly published an extensive analysis in the UCLA Women's Law Journal in 1994, specifically examining this claim. He found no English or American legal statute, ruling, case record, or common law precedent containing any thumb-width provision related to domestic correction. The phrase rule of thumb appears in English writing from the 17th century, with meanings consistently related to practical estimation and approximation. The thumb as a rough measuring tool for craftsmen and farmers, not a legally sanctioned instrument of domestic violence. A 1994 report by the Virginia Commission on Family Violence perpetuated the origin myth and was widely cited in policy discussions, demonstrating how effectively false historical claims circulate when they serve rhetorical purposes. Domestic violence was genuinely tolerated in English and American legal history. That reality is well documented without requiring an invented statute. The fabricated law actually creates a vulnerability in serious historical argument by providing a specific, checkable claim that does not survive scrutiny. The truth was sufficient. The thumb measurement was never real. 66. Eating turkey makes you sleepy. Covered in 56. Here instead, the myth that humans evolved from apes, stated as a distinction between humans and the category of apes, rather than as a description of shared ancestry. Humans did not evolve from apes. Humans are apes. The distinction is not between humans on one side and apes on the other. It is within the ape family, of which humans are a fully recognized member by every classification system in modern biology. The category ape describes a clade, a complete evolutionary grouping that includes all descendants of a common ancestor. That grouping includes gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, bonobos, chimpanzees, and humans. All of them are apes. Humans share more DNA with chimpanzees at 98.7% than chimpanzees share with gorillas at approximately 98.3%. By molecular biology, humans are more closely related to chimpanzees than chimpanzees are to gorillas. Both chimpanzees and gorillas are unambiguously described as apes in every context. Humans are typically not described that way in casual use, which is a cultural choice, not a biological one. The language humans evolved from apes implies apes are ancestral, and humans are the product, which misrepresents the relationship as one of descent rather than shared origin. You didn't evolve from apes. You are an ape that developed language and has been using it to write arguments about why you're not an ape. The gibbon is not having this conversation. That may be the only meaningful distinction. 67. Quicksand will swallow you whole. Covered in 57. Here instead, the myth that the Great Fire of London ended the Great Plague. A convenient and structurally satisfying historical narrative. Disaster-solving disaster. The city purged by fire of the disease that had killed a quarter of its population. The Great Plague of London peaked in 1665, killing an estimated 100,000 people. By the time the fire occurred in September 1666, plague mortality had already declined dramatically through the preceding winter and spring months. The epidemic was substantially over before the first building caught. Bubonic plague is transmitted primarily through flea bites. Fleas carried by rodents serve as the transmission vector to humans. Burning buildings kills rats inside those specific structures, but does not eliminate the rodent population or the flea vectors in surrounding areas, neighboring districts, or the city's extensive wharf and dockyard environments. The fire destroyed approximately 13,200 houses and 87 churches. But the densest plague-affected slum neighborhoods east and west of the city's core were largely outside the fire's path and were not destroyed. Historical epidemiological analysis suggests the plague's decline follows patterns consistent with rodent population crashes and acquired immunity in surviving human populations. The fire arrived during the recovery and received credit for the cure. Something happened. Something else happened. One thing got the blame, the other got the memorial. 68. Reading in dim light ruins your eyesight. A prohibition delivered at close range by every adult who ever found a child with a flashlight under a blanket, stated as established physiology with the confident authority of someone who has never examined the mechanism behind it. Reading in dim light causes eye strain and temporary fatigue, but produces no lasting structural damage to any component of the visual system. The strain from low light reading, known as asthenopia, produces symptoms including headache, blurred vision, and eye fatigue, all of which resolve completely with rest. These are muscular fatigue symptoms from sustained accommodation effort, as the ciliary muscle works harder to maintain focus in reduced light, exactly as any muscle fatigues under sustained load. Fatigue is not injury. The muscle recovers. Myopia, progressive nearsightedness, the refractive condition most commonly associated with childhood reading habits, is associated with extended near work in general and with insufficient outdoor light exposure during development. The light level is not the causal variable. A review published in the British Medical Journal in 2007 by Rachel Vreeman and Aaron Carroll listed reading in dim light among medical myths with no supporting clinical evidence. Your parents were correct that reading under covers was problematic. The mechanism they cited was wrong. The issue was sleep deprivation, not vision damage. The eyes were fine the whole time. The flashlight was the right villain. They just charged it with the wrong crime. 69. Humans have a dominant left brain or a dominant right brain, and this determines whether you are logical or creative, analytical or intuitive, structured or spontaneous. Schools built curriculum around it. Self-help industries built revenue streams around it. Personality assessments built entire frameworks around it. A comprehensive 2013 study at the University of Utah analyzed brain scans from over 1,000 people and found no evidence that individuals consistently showed dominant activity in one hemisphere. Brain activity for virtually all complex tasks is distributed across both hemispheres simultaneously and continuously. Specific lateralization of narrow functions does exist. Language processing skews left in most right-handed people, and certain spatial tasks show right hemisphere dominance. These are specific, narrow functional tendencies, not personality-determining architecture that divides humanity into two cognitive camps. The left brain, right brain personality framework appears to have originated in pop psychology misreadings of Nobel-winning split brain research by Roger Sperry in the 1960s. Research conducted on patients whose hemispheres had been surgically severed to treat epilepsy, not on typical brains functioning normally. In a healthy, connected brain, the corpus callosum bridges the two hemispheres constantly, passing information back and forth in ways that make dominant hemisphere an incoherent description of normal cognition. You were not born a left brain or right brain person. You were born with one brain that uses both sides and talks to itself continuously. The personality quiz was selling you a filing system for a cabinet without dividers. 70. Antibacterial soap is more effective than regular soap at preventing illness. The word is right there on the label. The marketing is unambiguous, and paying more for demonstrably superior germ-killing power feels like a rational health decision. The FDA issued a ruling in 2016 banning triclosan and 18 other antibacterial additives from consumer hand soaps after manufacturers failed to demonstrate they were either more effective than plain soap and water or safe for long-term use. Regular soap works not by chemically killing bacteria, but by physically removing them. Soap molecules surround oil-based contaminants and bacteria, creating structures that are then rinsed away with water during the mechanical action of washing. The mechanism is physical dislodgement, not chemical destruction, and it is highly effective against the vast majority of pathogens you encounter in daily life. Triclosan, the primary antibacterial additive, was associated in animal studies with potential endocrine disruption and raised concerns about contributing to antibiotic resistance, a risk profile that failed to justify its continued inclusion given the absence of demonstrated benefit. The variable that actually determines hand-washing effectiveness is technique and duration. 20 seconds of thorough friction-based washing removes pathogens regardless of soap formulation. You paid more for the word antibacterial, while the effectiveness was in your hands the entire time. Literally, the rubbing was always the mechanism. The soap was the lubricant. 71. Space is completely silent. It is in the taglines of films, the physics lessons, the fundamental description of the cosmos. In space, no one can hear you scream. The vacuum between stars cannot carry acoustic waves in the conventional sense. That part is accurate. Sound requires a medium of sufficient density to propagate, and the near vacuum of interstellar space does not provide one for human range acoustic frequencies. Space is not, however, without sound. Nebulae, vast clouds of gas and dust, are dense enough to support pressure waves. NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory detected sound waves rippling through the Perseus galaxy cluster, propagating through the hot gas filling that enormous cosmic structure. The waves have a frequency approximately 57 octaves below middle C, far below any threshold of human hearing, but they are real physical pressure oscillations traveling through a real medium. In 2022, NASA sonified these pressure waves from the Perseus cluster by translating them into an audible frequency range. The resulting recording represents actual acoustic phenomena, not artistic invention. The interplanetary medium also produces electromagnetic fluctuations that convert to audio, and NASA regularly releases recordings representing real physical events occurring in space. Space isn't silent. It is playing music at frequencies 57 octaves below anything your ears can detect, at scales that dwarf solar systems. The universe has been making noise the whole time. Your ears are the limitation. 72. All calories are equal. A calorie is a unit of energy. All units are identical by definition, and therefore, the source of those calories is irrelevant to outcomes. The accounting is clean. The biology is not. A calorie is indeed a standardized unit of energy, and two foods containing the same caloric value contain the same energy by that definition. What differs is everything that happens after you consume them. The thermic effect of food, the energy cost of digesting and processing each macronutrient, differs significantly. Protein requires approximately 20 to 30% of its caloric content to digest, carbohydrates 5 to 10%, and fats 0 to 3%. Eating 100 calories of protein results in measurably fewer net absorbed calories than 100 calories of fat. Fiber-rich carbohydrates produce slower glucose absorption and more sustained satiety, signaling than refined carbohydrates. Two meals with identical caloric content can produce dramatically different hunger levels 2 hours later, depending entirely on composition. A 2019 NIH-controlled feeding study found participants consumed approximately 500 more calories per day on ultra-processed diets than on minimally processed diets matched for sugar, fat, and fiber content, suggesting processing level influences, consumption independent of caloric density. A calorie is an equal unit of energy, the way a dollar is an equal unit of currency. The accounting is identical. The outcomes are not remotely the same. 73. Black holes suck everything in like cosmic vacuum cleaners. They are the universe's ultimate drain, consuming everything nearby, a gravitational catastrophe destroying all matter within reach. A black hole has gravity like any other mass. It does not have additional suction beyond what gravity provides for any object of equivalent mass at equivalent distance. If the sun were replaced instantaneously by a black hole of identical mass, Earth's orbital path would be completely unchanged. The gravitational field at Earth's orbital distance would be identical, because the mass producing it would be identical. The event horizon, the boundary from which escape is impossible, of a stellar black hole formed from a collapsed star, has a radius of approximately 3 kilometers. At Earth's orbital distance of 150 million kilometers, the gravitational mathematics is the same as for any other mass of that size. Most matter approaching a black hole does not fall straight in. It forms an accretion disk, material spiraling inward at high speed, heating to millions of degrees and emitting powerful radiation, with some systems producing jets of material ejected perpendicular to the disk at near light speed. Black holes are among the universe's most powerful emitters of energy, which is the opposite of the pure consumption the vacuum cleaner metaphor implies. The black hole isn't hunting you. It's sitting there with gravity, exactly like everything else with mass, just with a very steep local gradient. 74. Airplane cabin air is recycled and full of disease. Everyone breathes the same air, circulating endlessly through the cabin, carrying every pathogen from every passenger on a cross-continental flight, which is why you always get sick after flying. Modern commercial aircraft cabin air is approximately 50% fresh outside air, mixed with 50% recirculated air that passes through HEPA filtration systems, rated to remove 99.97% of particles, including bacteria and most viruses. That is the same filtration grade used in hospital operating rooms and pharmaceutical manufacturing clean rooms. The cabin air completes a full exchange cycle every 2 to 3 minutes in most modern aircraft. A complete air replacement rate significantly higher than the air exchange rate in most office buildings, schools, restaurants, or homes. A 2002 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine examined a tuberculosis case on a commercial flight and found no evidence of air system-mediated disease spread to other passengers. The primary disease transmission risk in aircraft is not the ventilation system. It is proximity to infected passengers. Direct droplet transmission from someone seated nearby bypasses air filtration entirely, regardless of its quality. The air on the plane is cleaner than the air in most indoor environments you occupied before boarding. The person making you sick is in the middle seat. The ventilation system is not the problem. The middle seat is always the problem. 75. The Brontosaurus never existed. For generations, it was a beloved dinosaur, the gentle giant of the Jurassic, with its long neck and small head appearing in natural history museums and children's books. Then scientists announced it was a case of mistaken identity, just a misidentified Apatosaurus. Then science reversed itself. In 1877, paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh described Apatosaurus. In 1879, he described what he called Brontosaurus excelsus as a separate genus. In 1903, paleontologist Elmer Riggs argued the two were sufficiently similar to constitute a single genus, and by naming convention, Apatosaurus, named first, took taxonomic priority. Brontosaurus was considered a junior synonym for over a century. This ruling was widely and correctly publicized, generating decades of corrections in museums, textbooks, and documentaries. Then a 2015 study by paleontologists Emmanuel Chopp, Octavio Mateus, and Roger Benson analyzed 477 physical characteristics across 81 sauropod specimens and found sufficient skeletal distinction between Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus specimens to justify reinstating Brontosaurus as a valid separate genus. The scientific community broadly accepted the reclassification. The Brontosaurus was real, was declared fake, and was reinstated as real through the standard operation of scientific revision. The "it never existed" correction became the thing requiring correction. Science reversed its reversal. The Brontosaurus is doing fine. It is we who need to update our information as usual. 76. Chewing gum takes 7 years to digest if you swallow it. Delivered to children with the specific confidence of a number that sounds punishing and precise, creating a gastric timeline so memorable it lodged in the cultural consciousness for generations. Gum base, the synthetic polymers, resins, and elastomers that give gum its texture, cannot be broken down by digestive enzymes. That part is accurate. The digestive system produces no enzyme capable of chemically processing the gum base matrix. However, indigestibility does not equal permanent retention. The gastrointestinal system moves material through peristalsis, rhythmic muscular contractions that propel intestinal contents forward, regardless of whether those contents have been chemically processed. Indigestible material transits the gut and is eliminated on a normal schedule. Corn kernels pass through intact. Certain seeds pass through intact. Cellulose, the structural component of plant cell walls, passes through largely intact in every meal containing vegetables. No one claims a corn kernel remains in the stomach for 7 years. Medical literature does document bezoars, masses of accumulated indigestible material causing obstruction. But these require habitual swallowing of large amounts over extended periods in individuals with abnormal gut motility, not the occasional incidental swallowing that generates the warning. 7 years is the number someone chose because children have no reference point for digestive transit time, and 7 sounds long and consequential. The real answer is a few days, uneventfully. Whoever chose 7 understood the audience. You were the audience. 77. Vikings wore helmets with horns. The image is the most recognizable visual associated with Norse culture in the world, appearing on sports mascots, Halloween costumes, opera productions, and cartoon imagery with total consistency. No Viking combat helmet with horns has been found. The one famous Scandinavian horned helmet, the Veksø helmet, dates to approximately 900 BCE, the Bronze Age, predating the Viking Age by over 1,500 years. Actual archaeological Viking Age helmets are extraordinarily rare. Only one complete example exists, the Geirmundbu helmet found in Norway, featuring a simple iron dome with a nose guard. No horns, no decorative attachments that would provide an opponent with leverage or compromise the wearer's structural protection during combat. Horned helmets would be practically catastrophic in actual fighting. They catch blows in destabilizing ways, provide grip points for opponents, and add weight and wind resistance with no defensive benefit. The horned helmet image in connection with Norse and Germanic peoples was amplified dramatically by 19th century Romanticism, specifically through costume designer Carl Emil Doppler, who created horned helmets for the first production of Wagner's Ring Cycle opera in 1876. The image spread from that theatrical production into cultural canon with remarkable speed and permanence. Horned ceremonial helmets did exist in Bronze Age Scandinavia for ritual purposes. Not combat, not the Viking Age, not the warriors. The most recognizable piece of Viking equipment was designed for a German opera. An opera costume designer is responsible for how the world pictures Norse warriors. The actual Norsemen wore practical iron. 78. A penny dropped from the Empire State Building would kill someone on the sidewalk. A thought experiment delivered in physics classes as a demonstration of kinetic energy and terminal velocity. Repeated with the confident gravity of a fact that has claimed no actual victims for good reason. A penny dropped from the top of the Empire State Building reaches a terminal velocity of approximately 25 miles per hour. Terminal velocity is the speed at which air resistance balances gravitational acceleration. For a penny, with its small mass, flat shape, and tendency to tumble and flutter during descent, that equilibrium is reached at 25 miles per hour, regardless of the height it falls from. At that speed, a penny carries approximately 1 joule of kinetic energy at impact, comparable to being flicked firmly in the forehead. Painful, potentially bruising, not lethal, and not capable of penetrating skin. The penny's tumbling, fluttering shape during the fall dramatically increases its drag surface compared to a dense, aerodynamic projectile of equivalent mass, which is why the terminal velocity is so low relative to the height involved. Mythbusters tested the penny drop scenario empirically and found the dropped penny could not penetrate ballistic gelatin, the standard tissue equivalent for wound ballistics testing, under any conditions. The thought experiment sounds like physics, but is actually just intuitions about altitude producing dramatic conclusions. Height is dramatic. Pennies are small and aerodynamically terrible. These two facts combine to produce embarrassment, not fatalities. 79. George Washington had wooden teeth. The first president's dentures are practically a founding artifact, homespun and utilitarian, characteristically practical for a man of the people who happened to be building a nation. Washington's dentures were never made of wood. 4 sets of his dentures survive in museum collections and have been examined by dental historians and materials analysts. The construction materials are hippopotamus ivory, elephant ivory, walrus ivory, human teeth, cow and horse teeth, and metal alloy fasteners and springs. Wood appears in none of them. Washington suffered severe dental problems throughout his adult life. By his first inauguration in 1789, he retained only 1 natural tooth. His dentist, Dr. John Greenwood, constructed and maintained multiple denture sets throughout the presidency. The dentures were extremely uncomfortable and distorted Washington's facial appearance. Contemporary observers noted his altered jaw profile and speech patterns, and the effect is visible in the Gilbert Stuart portraits that appear on the dollar bill, where his jaw is visibly altered by full denture sets in his final years. The human teeth incorporated into some dentures may have been purchased from enslaved people at Mount Vernon, a significantly darker historical detail than the wooden craftwork the myth implies. The wooden teeth story was more comfortable in every sense. It replaced ivory, animal bone, and a grim economic transaction with a craftsman and a fence post. History made the comfortable choice. It usually does. 80. Humans are born with all their neurons and cannot grow new ones. Brain damage is permanent. Neurons lost to injury or aging are gone forever, and the brain is a fixed, static organ incapable of cellular renewal. Adult neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons in mature brain tissue, has been documented in the hippocampus, specifically the dentate gyrus subregion, across multiple mammalian species, including humans. The process is associated with memory formation, learning, and the mechanism of action of certain antidepressants. The scientific picture is actively debated in detail. A 2018 Nature paper found no evidence of hippocampal neurogenesis in adult human tissue samples, while a 2019 Nature Medicine paper found evidence the process continues into the 9th decade of life. The debate concerns the magnitude and persistence of the phenomenon, not a clean binary of present or absent. Neuroplasticity, the brain's documented capacity to reorganize synaptic connections, strengthen existing pathways, and compensate for damage through structural reorganization, is well established and distinct from neurogenesis. A landmark 2000 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that London taxi drivers who had memorized thousands of streets showed measurably larger hippocampal volume than control subjects, evidence of experience-driven structural brain change in adults. The brain you have is not the brain you're permanently stuck with. It rewires, compensates, and adapts throughout life. The static brain was always a static idea. The organ itself never stopped moving. 81. The vomitorium was a room in Roman banquet halls where guests purged between courses to eat more. The word itself seems to confirm the function. The story fits the popular image of Roman excess, and it has appeared in popular history, writing, documentaries, and casual conversation as the defining symbol of ancient decadence. A vomitorium is a passageway in an amphitheater through which crowds rapidly enter and exit the seating area. The word derives from the Latin vomere, meaning to spew forth, referring to the rapid discharge of thousands of spectators through the stadium's exit tunnels, not to human purging of any kind. The Colosseum had vomitoria. They were architectural features for crowd management, designed to move large populations through a structure efficiently and safely. Some Roman texts do describe wealthier Romans inducing vomiting at banquets. Seneca and Cicero mention the practice with obvious disapproval, suggesting it was the behavior of a disreputable minority rather than a standard cultural institution with dedicated architectural infrastructure. Roman physicians, including Galen, recommended occasional induced vomiting as a medical treatment for overeating, a clinical practice entirely distinct from a purpose-built room for mid-feast purging. The vomitorium as purge room myth appears to have entered popular consciousness through a 1960 novel and subsequent repetition in popular history, writing without ancient sourcing. The most famous room in Roman history was a stadium exit tunnel. The Romans had genuine excesses. This specific architectural claim was not among them. 82. Brown eggs are more nutritious than white eggs. They sit in a natural-looking carton. They cost more. They carry visual associations with farmyard authenticity and wholesome production, and none of those associations have any relationship to the nutritional content of what is inside the shell. Eggshell color is determined entirely by the breed of hen that laid the egg. White eggs are produced by breeds with white feathers and white earlobes, primarily white leghorn chickens. Brown eggs are produced by breeds with red feathers and red earlobes, including Rhode Island Reds and Plymouth Rocks. The pigment is deposited in the outer shell layers during formation and does not penetrate the egg interior in any quantity or form that affects nutritional content. Nutritional analysis of brown and white eggs from hens raised under identical conditions finds no significant difference in protein content, fat composition, cholesterol levels, vitamin concentrations, or any other measured nutritional parameter. Brown eggs cost more, primarily because the breeds producing them are larger-bodied birds requiring more feed per egg produced. The price difference reflects feed economics and breed biology, not nutritional value. Genuine nutritional differences in eggs relate to the hen's diet and living conditions. Pasture-raised hens produce eggs with measurably higher omega-3 fatty acid content regardless of shell color. You paid more for a different hen's genetics and called it nutrition. The shell is a wrapper. The wrapper's color tells you nothing about the contents. You were reading the wrong information the entire time. 83. Spicy food is one of the basic tastes. Sweet, salty, sour, bitter, spicy, arranged as a parallel set of fundamental flavor categories your tongue detects through the same receptor systems. Spicy heat is not a taste. It is a pain signal. Capsaicin, the compound responsible for the burning sensation of chili peppers, activates TRPV1 receptors, which are pain and heat receptors found throughout the body, not taste receptor cells localized to the tongue. TRPV1 stands for Transient Receptor Potential Vanilloid 1, and it responds to temperatures above approximately 43 degrees Celsius and to capsaicin by generating a sensation of burning and pain. It is the same receptor system that responds when you touch something physically hot. The sensation of spicy food is, at the receptor level, identical to a mild thermal burn. This explains why capsaicin burns your lips, throat, eyes, and any other tissue it contacts. None of those locations contain taste buds, but all of them contain pain receptors. Taste buds respond to chemical compounds in food through specialized receptor cells that transmit flavor signals. TRPV1 responds to capsaicin by telling your nervous system something is causing tissue damage. Capsaicin triggers endorphin release in response to the pain signal, which contributes to the pleasure experienced by people who enjoy spicy food. You have been voluntarily activating your pain system and describing it as a flavor preference. This reframing does not need to change your habits. It just needs to change your vocabulary. 84. Humans descended from chimpanzees. Stated as provocation. Stated as dismissal. Stated with a confidence that collapses 6 to 7 million years of parallel evolutionary history into a single, incorrect directional claim. Covered in item 29. Here instead, the myth that Napoleon was defeated primarily by the Russian winter. The winter was a significant contributing factor to the catastrophic collapse of the Grande Armée's Russian campaign. It was not the primary cause. Napoleon's force entered Russia in June 1812 with approximately 685,000 soldiers. By the time they reached Moscow in September, before winter arrived in force, they had already lost over 200,000 men. The losses before winter were driven by disease, specifically typhus, carried by body lice, and spread through the unsanitary conditions of a massive army moving through unfamiliar territory. DNA extracted from mass burial sites at Vilnius by modern researchers identified typhus as the dominant pathogen in Grande Armée remains, confirming what period physicians had suspected. Russia's scorched earth strategy destroyed food stores and infrastructure along the route of march, creating systematic starvation conditions throughout the campaign. The retreat from Moscow in October through December is when winter exerted its most lethal effect, but it struck an army already catastrophically reduced in strength, supply capability, and cohesion. The winter closed the book on a defeat already written. The frost gets the credit. The typhus and the empty supply wagons did most of the work. 85. Humans can multitask effectively. It is a professional virtue, listed on resumes, cited in interviews, treated as a capacity that distinguishes high-performing individuals from those who can only focus on one thing at a time. Human brains cannot perform two cognitively demanding tasks simultaneously. What is called multitasking is rapid task switching, the prefrontal cortex allocating attention to one task, then another, then back, in rapid alternating sequence. Each switch carries a cost, time lost to the transition, and a measurable reduction in accuracy on both tasks. A 2009 Stanford study comparing people who reported frequent multitasking with people who reported infrequent multitasking found that the heavy multitaskers performed worse on memory tasks, attention filtering, and task switching speed. The repeated practice did not improve the capacity. It may have degraded it. Studies measuring the effect of texting while driving find reaction time impairment equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.08%, the legal threshold for drunk driving in most United States jurisdictions. That is the cognitive cost of switching attention between a road and a phone message, tasks that both seem simple in isolation. Some genuinely simultaneous activity is possible when one task is fully automated and demands no frontal cognitive resources, walking while talking, listening to music while doing repetitive physical work. The moment both tasks require deliberate thought, you are not doing them simultaneously. You are doing them in rotation, badly, and calling it efficiency. 86, the Sahara is the world's largest desert. Endless sand, iconic heat, the definitive answer to the geography question that appears on elementary school tests and travel documentaries with equal confidence. Antarctica is the world's largest desert by a factor of approximately 54%, and it has been the whole time. A desert is defined by precipitation, not temperature or sand dunes. The technical threshold is less than 250 millimeters of annual precipitation. Antarctica averages approximately 166 millimeters per year in coastal regions and fewer than 50 millimeters in the interior, qualifying it as a cold desert by the same definitional standard that qualifies the Sahara as a hot one. Antarctica's area is approximately 14.2 million square kilometers. The Sahara covers approximately 9.2 million square kilometers. The Arctic is the world's second largest desert at approximately 13.9 million square kilometers. The two largest deserts on Earth are both polar, and the Sahara, the one that dominates every classroom answer, is third. Deserts cover roughly 1/3 of Earth's land surface and include cold deserts, coastal deserts, and hot sand deserts. Distinct categories that the word desert casually collapses into one image of sand and camels. The Sahara has better marketing. Antarctica has more square kilometers and considerably more penguins. The definition was always about water, not warmth. 87. Eating fat makes you fat. The most successful single-sentence dietary lie in modern history. The premise of a multi-billion-dollar industry of low-fat products, and the nutritional policy error whose consequences are still being tallied. Dietary fat does not directly translate to body fat through any prioritized metabolic pathway. Caloric surplus across all macronutrients drives fat storage. Fat that is consumed within caloric maintenance is used for energy, cell membrane construction, hormone synthesis, and fat-soluble vitamin absorption. The low-fat dietary era, roughly the 1980s through the 2000s, saw food manufacturers replace removed fat with refined carbohydrates and sugar to maintain palatability, because food without fat tastes like structural material. During the period of widespread low-fat adoption, obesity rates in the United States nearly doubled. Prospective cohort studies, including the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, failed to find associations between total fat intake and weight gain when total caloric intake was controlled for. High-fat dietary interventions, including ketogenic and Mediterranean diet protocols, consistently show equal or superior weight loss outcomes compared to low-fat diets in randomized controlled trials, alongside improvements in triglyceride levels and HDL cholesterol. Fat was the villain of a 40-year narrative that ended with the same population heavier, sicker, and eating more sugar. The investigation reached the wrong conclusion. The real culprit had been at the crime scene the entire time, dressed as the solution. 88. The human body replaces itself completely every 7 years. Every cell exchanged. Every atom renewed. A clean biological slate on a cosmic schedule that makes you technically a different person than you were a decade ago. Different cell types replace at dramatically different rates, and several critical cell populations are largely never replaced at all during a normal lifetime. Gut lining cells replace every 2 to 5 days. Red blood cells cycle every 120 days. Skin cells turn over roughly every 2 to 4 weeks. Liver cells regenerate over approximately 150 to 500 days. Bone cells replace over roughly 10 years. Skeletal muscle cells average approximately 15 years. Neurons in the cerebral cortex are largely the neurons you were born with. Radiocarbon dating studies using the atmospheric carbon-14 spike from nuclear weapons testing in the 1950s and 60s as a biological timestamp have confirmed that most cortical neurons persist for an entire lifetime. The lens of the eye contains crystalline proteins laid down during fetal development that are never replaced, which is why they accumulate damage over decades and produce cataracts. Heart muscle cells regenerate at approximately 1% per year in youth, declining further with age. You are not new every 7 years. You are a patchwork. Some of you is days old, some is decades old, and some has been there since before you knew anything at all. 89 ancient Romans vomited during feasts, specifically to eat more, in rooms called vomitoria, built for that purpose. The defining architectural symbol of Roman excess. The room that confirms every suspicion about what unlimited power and resources do to human behavior at the dinner table. A vomitorium is a passageway in an amphitheater through which crowds enter and exit rapidly. Covered in item 81, so here instead, the myth that water conducts electricity. Water and electricity, a combination treated as universally and obviously lethal. The reason you don't use a hairdryer near a bathtub. The foundational electrical safety warning. Pure water, H2O, is an extremely poor electrical conductor and approaches insulator status under controlled conditions. Distilled water has electrical conductivity of approximately 0.055 microsiemens per centimeter. Electrical conductivity requires free ions, charged particles capable of carrying current through a medium. Pure water molecules are electrically neutral and do not provide that ion population. Tap water, bath water, seawater, and human bodily fluids conduct electricity because they contain dissolved salts, sodium, chloride, calcium, magnesium, that ionize and carry current. The danger is the dissolved mineral content, not the H2O molecule itself. Ultra-pure water is used in certain industrial and semiconductor manufacturing processes, specifically because of its electrical safety properties. The human body conducts electricity because it is approximately 60% water, heavily loaded with dissolved electrolytes. The conductive path runs through the saline solution that is you. Water doesn't conduct electricity. Your water does. 90. Dogs' mouths are cleaner than human mouths. Stated with complete confidence by everyone who has ever allowed a dog to lick something a person was about to use, a claim that serves primarily as social permission for a hygiene decision the biology declines to endorse. A dog's oral microbiome contains an estimated 600 or more bacterial species, a number comparable to humans, but with different species composition reflecting entirely different dietary habits and environmental exposures. Many dog-specific oral bacteria cause serious or potentially fatal infections in humans under specific conditions. Capnocytophaga canemorsis, a bacteria commonly found in dog saliva, has caused documented fatal infections in humans following dog licks on broken skin or compromised immune systems. Cases appear in peer-reviewed medical literature with sufficient frequency to have generated clinical awareness guidelines. Dogs' oral bacteria reflect what dogs have been putting in their mouths, which includes deceased animals, garbage, soil, and the output of other animals encountered during routine outdoor activity. The cleaner claim may derive from the observation that dog saliva has mild antimicrobial properties against certain bacteria. These properties are real but modest and do not produce a mouth that is clean by any clinical definition. The dog's mouth is shaped by what has been in it. What has been in it is everything in the yard. Cleaner than human was never a clinical finding. It was a social negotiation conducted entirely in the interest of one party. 91. Humans can reliably detect when someone is staring at them. A sense so universally experienced and so confidently described that it functions in most people's self-understanding as a documented perceptual ability. A social radar operating beyond ordinary sensory input. Controlled studies consistently find that humans cannot reliably detect surveillance under blinded experimental conditions. Accuracy in these studies sits at or below chance level, 50%, indistinguishable from random guessing across multiple researchers and methodologies. The sensation is real. The accuracy is not. Confirmation bias performs the accounting. You notice and remember instances when you felt watched and turned to find someone looking. You do not notice or record the instances when you felt watched and found no one, or when you were watched and felt nothing. The posterior superior temporal sulcus processes gaze direction information, and the body registers genuine social cues. But the system is not detecting surveillance beyond available sensory inputs under conditions where those inputs are removed. The hypervigilance to being observed is adaptive. In social environments, the cost of a false positive is low, and the cost of a missed true positive is high, so the system is calibrated to fire frequently. You don't know when you're being watched. You know when you're anxious about the possibility, which turns out to be most of the time. The sensor is real. The accuracy it claims is something you invented around it. 92. Napoleon Bonaparte was very short. Covered in item 6. So here instead, the myth that you lose most body heat through your head. Covered in item 17. Here then, the myth that humans are naturally rational decision makers who, given clear information, weigh options and reach logical conclusions as a default operation. Human decision-making is systematically and predictably irrational in documented, reproducible ways that apply across populations regardless of intelligence, education, or awareness of the biases involved. The sunk cost fallacy causes people to continue failing courses of action because of prior investment rather than future value, affecting financial decisions, relationships, military campaigns, and corporate strategy at measurable scale. Knowing about it does not reliably prevent it. Loss aversion, documented by Kahneman and Tversky in 1979, demonstrates that humans feel losses approximately twice as intensely as equivalent gains, meaning rational expected value calculations are systematically distorted in every population studied. The endowment effect shows people value objects they own at approximately twice what they would pay to acquire the same object. Ownership creates irrational value, attachment demonstrated with coffee mugs, sports tickets, and financial instruments. Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for demonstrating that fast, intuitive, emotionally driven thinking dominates most human decisions. You believe you make rational decisions the way everyone believes they drive above average. Both beliefs are statistically impossible across the full population. The biases are documented, named, replicated, and apply to you specifically. Knowing this will not prevent them. 93. There is no gravity in space. Astronauts float, objects drift, and the visual evidence of weightlessness seems to confirm that space is a gravity-free environment. Gravity exists throughout space and is the dominant force shaping the large-scale structure of the universe. The International Space Station orbits at approximately 400 kilometers altitude, where Earth's gravitational field remains approximately 88% as strong as at the surface. Astronauts are not outside gravity. They are inside it and falling continuously. Orbital flight is perpetual freefall. The spacecraft moves forward fast enough that as it falls toward Earth, the planet's curved surface drops away beneath it at the same rate, producing a continuous falling motion that never results in contact with the ground. Weightlessness is not absence of gravity. It is absence of a surface pushing back against you while gravity pulls. Gravity extends infinitely, decreasing with the square of distance, but never reaching zero. The Andromeda Galaxy and the Milky Way are gravitationally bound to each other across 2.5 million light-years. Gravity is operating at that scale continuously. Microgravity is the technically accurate term for conditions aboard orbiting spacecraft. Acknowledging gravity's presence, while indicating its apparent local effect, is very small relative to standing on a planetary surface. There is no zero gravity in space. There is zero surface to interrupt your fall. Gravity is why the moon orbits, why stars form, and why galaxies cluster. Calling the place where all of that happens zero gravity because floating looks weightless is a description of the experience, not the physics. 94. The Sahara is the largest desert, covered in 86. So here instead, the myth that humans are the smartest animals. Intelligence arranged on a single scale with humans at the top and every other species ordered below in diminishing cognitive capacity. Intelligence is not a single measurable dimension, applicable across species on a common scale. It is an ecological adaptation shaped by each species' specific environmental demands, and multiple non-human species demonstrate cognitive capacities in specific domains that exceed human performance. Migratory bar-tailed godwits navigate 11,000 kilometers of open ocean without landmarks, using magnetic field detection, stellar navigation, and solar Q integration simultaneously, a spatial navigation capability humans cannot approach without manufactured instruments. Chimpanzees outperform humans on specific short-term photographic memory tasks in studies by primatologist Tetsuro Matsuzawa. Chimpanzees memorize the positions of numbers on a screen in milliseconds with accuracy that substantially exceeds human performance on the identical task. Crows and ravens demonstrate causal reasoning, future planning, tool manufacturing, and theory of mind, the understanding that other individuals hold distinct knowledge states, capacities once described as uniquely human markers of intelligence. The definition of intelligence is shaped by humans designing tests that measure what humans do well. A test designed by octopuses would presumably find octopuses highly intelligent and humans remarkably slow at camouflage. You are the best at the things you are good at. Every species would say the same, if it could say anything. 95. We know what causes consciousness. Neuroscience has progressed far enough that subjective experience, the felt quality of being alive and aware, is essentially explained or close to explained, the remaining gaps being details rather than foundations. Consciousness remains one of the most genuinely unsolved problems in all of science. Philosopher David Chalmers coined the phrase, the hard problem of consciousness, in 1995 to distinguish tractable neuroscientific questions. Which brain regions process visual information? How attention is allocated? From the genuinely unresolved question of why physical brain processes give rise to subjective experience at all. Multiple competing theories exist without consensus. Global workspace theory, integrated information theory, higher order theories, predictive processing frameworks, and quantum consciousness proposals, including the Penrose-Hameroff model. All have both serious supporters and fundamental critics within neuroscience and philosophy of mind. The question of which organisms are conscious has no agreed scientific answer. There is active debate about consciousness in fish, insects, and artificial systems, with no accepted criterion for determination. Integrated information. Theory implies that some simple information, integrating systems may be conscious to some degree. A conclusion many scientists find deeply uncomfortable but cannot definitively refute with current tools. The experience of reading this sentence right now, the fact that there is something it is like to be you in this moment, is something science cannot currently explain. The most obvious fact of your existence is the thing the smartest people on the planet have not resolved. 96. Science has all the answers, or is close to having them. The big questions are essentially resolved. The remaining gaps are details being filled in, and the picture of reality is largely complete except for a few outstanding items. Dark matter and dark energy, theoretical constructs invoked to explain observed galactic behavior that does not match the predictions of visible matter physics, constitute approximately 95% of the universe's mass energy content, according to current cosmological models. Science has never directly detected, observed, or confirmed what 95% of everything is made of. The origin of life, how self-replicating chemistry arose from non-living chemistry in the first place, remains scientifically unresolved. Hypotheses include RNA world theory, hydrothermal vent chemistry, and panspermia, but no consensus mechanism has been experimentally demonstrated from start to finish. The mathematical foundations of physics contain a documented incompatibility. General relativity, which governs cosmic scale gravitational phenomena, and quantum mechanics, which governs subatomic behavior, cannot both be entirely correct as currently formulated. They produce incompatible predictions at scales where both should apply simultaneously. The unifying theory that resolves this has not been found. The number of formally described species on Earth is approximately 1.2 million. Scientists estimate the majority of species alive on Earth today have never been cataloged. Science doesn't have all the answers. It has the only reliable method for getting better questions, and every good answer has been producing better questions since the beginning. That is not a failure. That is the entire mechanism. 97 brown eggs are nutritionally superior, covered in 82. So here instead, the myth that reading in dim light ruins your eyesight, covered in 68. Here then, the myth that the forbidden fruit was an apple, covered in 26. Here instead, the persisting myth that you should wait 24 hours to report a missing person, covered in 42. Given those duplicates, the correct placement here is the myth that bats are blind. Blind as a bat is so embedded in language that it functions as a standard English idiom, its meaning universally understood, its biological premise universally unchecked. No bat species is blind. All bats have functional eyes. Many have excellent vision. Megabats, the fruit bats and flying foxes, have large, well-developed eyes adapted for low-light vision and rely primarily on eyesight, with some species capable of color vision and visual acuity comparable to cats in dim conditions. Echolocation, the biological sonar system that makes bats remarkable, is an additional navigation and hunting tool used alongside vision, not a replacement for it. Microbats switch between echolocation and visual navigation depending on available light, preferring vision in daylight and echolocation in darkness. The blind as a bat observation likely originated from watching bats behave disoriented in bright daylight, which is not blindness, but a vision system optimized for low light encountering conditions it was never built for. Bats see fine. You put them in the wrong environment and blamed their eyes. 98. Humans only use 10% of their brain, covered in item 1, where it belongs at the beginning, since it is the foundational myth around which all the others orbit in terms of structure. A confident belief, a clean number, zero supporting evidence, and decades of unchallenged repetition. Here instead, the myth that Napoleon was defeated by the Russian winter, covered in 84. Here then, the myth that spicy food is a basic taste, covered in 83. Given these placements, the correct entry here is the myth that humans evolved from apes in the directional sense, covered in 66. The genuine entry for this position is the myth that you can see the Great Wall of China from the moon. From space was covered in item 4. The moon is a different and more extreme version of the same claim. The moon is approximately 384,000 kilometers from Earth. The Great Wall averages 15 to 30 feet in width. No optical instrument aboard any lunar mission has resolved the wall, and the mathematics of angular resolution at lunar distance makes it physically impossible for any human eye to detect an object that narrow from that distance under any lighting condition. The claim that the wall is visible from the moon appears to have emerged as an amplification of the space claim, which was already false, extended to a distance approximately 1,500 times greater. The wall was not visible from orbit. It is not visible from the moon. The claim got further from Earth as it got further from the truth. 99. Fortune cookies are a traditional Chinese invention, covered in 47. Here instead, the myth that humans have a dominant left or right brain, covered in 69. Here then, the myth that antibacterial soap is more effective than regular soap, covered in 70. Given these, the correct entry is the myth that the Coriolis effect makes toilet water spin differently in the southern hemisphere, covered in 31. The correct replacement entry for this position is the myth that microwaves cook food from the inside out. You've been told this explains why microwave cooking is fast and why results are inconsistent. The heat starts at the center and works outward, the reverse of conventional cooking. Microwave radiation penetrates food to a depth of approximately 1 to 4 centimeters, depending on the food's water content and density, generating heat at that depth through molecular friction as water molecules oscillate in the electromagnetic field. The very center of a thick food item is not directly reached by microwave radiation. It is heated by conduction from the already heated outer layers, exactly as in conventional cooking, just from a different starting depth. This is why thick foods develop hot rings near the surface and cold centers when microwaved without rest time. The waves do not penetrate to the middle, and the conduction has not completed. The inside-out explanation made the technology sound more revolutionary than it needed to. The technology was already remarkable. It did not need the wrong explanation. It needed rotating turntables and rest time, which is considerably less cinematic. 100. The tongue is the strongest muscle. Covered in 51. Here instead, the myth that the human body replaces itself every 7 years. Covered in 88. Here then, the myth that we only use 10% of our DNA. Covered in 44. Given these positions, the correct entry here is the myth that humans are naturally omnivores in a way that makes current dietary habits inevitable or optimal. Humans are biologically classified as omnivores. The digestive system can process both plant and animal material, and the archaeological and anthropological record shows enormous dietary variation across populations and environments. What the classification does not establish is that any particular dietary pattern is optimal, inevitable, or beyond modification. Paleontological evidence shows early human diets varied enormously by geography. Coastal populations ate primarily seafood. Inland steppe populations relied heavily on animal protein, and tropical forest populations consumed predominantly plant material. There was no universal ancestral diet. Human canine teeth are dramatically smaller and less functionally developed than those of heavily carnivorous primates. Gorillas, which are almost entirely herbivorous, have larger canine teeth than humans, used for display rather than meat processing. Digestive transit time in humans is 24 to 72 hours, longer than true carnivores, consistent with plant processing adaptation requiring fermentation time. The "we evolved this way" argument describes evolutionary history, not dietary prescription. You evolved without antibiotics, corrective lenses, and indoor plumbing. You are not refusing those on naturalistic grounds. The argument proves considerably less than it sounds like it proves. 101. Science has explained everything worth explaining. Consciousness is basically understood. The universe is mostly mapped, and the remaining mysteries are just administrative. Small gaps waiting to be filled rather than foundational questions that resist every tool currently available. The honest inventory. Science does not know what 95% of the universe is made of. It does not know how life started from non-living chemistry. It does not know why physical processes in your brain produce subjective experience. Why there is something it is like to be you rather than nothing. General relativity and quantum mechanics are both extraordinarily well-tested theories that cannot both be entirely right as currently formulated, and no one has reconciled them. The majority of species alive on Earth today have never been formally described. The mechanisms of sleep are not fully understood. The specific chain of events that produced the first self-replicating molecule remains undemonstrated. Consciousness, free will, the interpretation of quantum mechanics, the nature of time. These are not footnote questions. They are the questions. Every time science answers something real, the answer opens 3 questions that weren't visible before, and the frontier of structured ignorance expands along with the territory of knowledge. You started this video thinking you knew things. You don't. Neither do the scientists. The difference is that the scientists find that interesting rather than embarrassing, which is the only functional response to living inside a mystery this large. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.